Change in Harmony, a Silver Script Novel, Book 4, written by Jacqueline Hardy, narrated by Velas Valor. This is a work of fiction, and the views expressed herein are the sole responsibility of the author. Likewise, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are represented fictitiously, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 1. Nate kept glancing at his phone, hoping it would ring. It was the last day before he would be kicked out of his apartment, and no one had accepted his application yet. There was something about having freezing pipes, flooding the place below, that had managers running the other way. 5 more minutes and he would call them. Nate watched as Aaron walked past and went into Deborah's office. He narrowed his eyes. She wasn't going to get another account, was she? She'd already scored all the best clients that SilverScript ad agency had pulled in. He glanced around his cubicle to see if there was anything he needed to take to Deborah, but he'd already had a meeting with her earlier that morning. He'd just have to find out about it at the meeting later. He ducked as the blonde girl from accounting walked past. He was supposed to call her last night and had forgotten. It's probably for the best. He couldn't even remember her name. Hannah? Haley? Something with an H? The buzzing of his phone jerked him out of his thoughts. He scrambled to pick it up, his heart beating rapidly. He needed this apartment. Hello? Is this Nate Sullivan? A gruff voice asked. Yes, speaking. Nate drummed his fingers on the desk. There was a rustling of paper. Everything seems to be in order. The apartment is yours, but I need you here to sign papers in the next hour, or I'll give it to someone else. Wait, what? You just give it to someone else? Nate glanced up at the clock. Look, this is New York City. I have a list of at least 10 other applicants, and all of them are qualified. If you're not here in an hour, I will give it to the next person. Bring your deposit. The call ended abruptly, and Nate stared at the phone, baffled. He jumped up and shoved his papers into the briefcase. There was still another hour of work, but Deborah knew he needed an apartment. She'd let him take off. He shut his laptop and set it next to the papers he'd have to work on that night. So much for the basketball game he'd hoped to attend. He slipped his coat on and grabbed his bag. With any luck, he'd be able to hit the subway just right and get there with plenty of time to spare, though getting the deposit would be a little trickier. After one more quick glance around to make sure he hadn't left anything he'd need, Nate rushed over to Deborah's office. He stuck his head in, noting the annoyed looks from Aaron. Hey, I need to take off. I finally got a call back from the apartment. Good luck. I'll see you in the morning at the meeting. Deborah leaned back in her chair. Nate waved and hurried toward the elevator. There were a few other people waiting, so he changed directions and went for the stairs instead. His footsteps echoed off the walls as he ran down the 5 flights of stairs. Good thing he was used to taking the stairs for exercise, but it also took time he didn't have. The receptionist called out a goodbye as he rushed past, but he didn't stop to flirt with her like he normally did. He simply waved as he pushed his way out of the building. The streets of New York were packed as usual. Normally, it didn't bother him. He lives and breathed the large city life, the people, the traffic, the noise. But today, they were all in the way of getting his dream apartment, a place he could have to himself instead of sharing with a crazy roommate. That was the one bonus of getting kicked out of his other apartment. He wouldn't have to deal with a roommate anymore. After several attempts for a taxi, Nate cursed and headed for the subway, taking 2 steps at a time. A quick glance at the map told him which train he needed to be on, and he sprinted toward the correct stop. There was only a minute until the next train, and he had to be on it. He nearly tripped on a child who stood staring at a post. He ignored the calls from the parents, knowing if he went back, he'd have to wait another 10 minutes for the next train. He ran down the steps just as the train pulled up, but as he ran for the door, the strap on his bag broke and fell to the ground, sending papers and his laptop in all directions. The bag was only a few months old. He crouched down and shoved things back in the bag. The laptop looked like it was okay, but he wouldn't know until he got back home to check it out. Several of the papers had footprints on them from people walking back and forth. A woman knelt on the ground to help him pick things up. Nate rocked back onto his feet, surprised that someone had stopped. It wasn't until she handed him a handful of receipts that he realized he'd just been staring. "Thank you." He took the receipts from her and put them in his pocket, making a note to himself to throw them away when he got home. "You're welcome." The woman wore layers of shirts, pants, and a pair of ballet slippers. Her feet had to be freezing. Her brown hair was piled up on the top of her head, with a few strands that had fallen loose. Nate nodded and turned away to watch for the next train. He still had time to get to the apartment, but time was ticking. While he waited, he took the strap and tied it through the loop and made sure it wouldn't break again. Someone played a flute behind him. When he turned to find where the music came from, he saw that it was the woman who was playing. No wonder she had so many layers on. It had to be freezing down here all day. He shook his head. This was New York. She could have found the job anywhere, and yet she chose to stay down here and play. She winked at him and continued playing. Nate smirked and turned away. He was thankful for her help, but he had other things to think about. 10 minutes later, Nate stood on the train as it pulled away. He watched the woman as she played. A few people had gathered to listen, but most passed by. Such a waste of time. The music was meant to lighten the mood, but no one even paid attention. He pulled out his phone to check the time. He'd be cutting it close, and he still had to pull out cash from the deposit. The moment the train doors opened, Nate was out and running for an ATM. The machine would only give him a little at a time before he had to go find another one. He cursed himself for not ordering more checks when he'd run out. He made it to the apartment in Chelsea with only a few minutes to spare. He pulled out his phone to check his hair and straightened his sports jacket before buzzing to go in. It was a few seconds before the same gruff voice he'd heard on the phone answered. "Yes." "Hey, this is Nate Sullivan. I'm here with the deposit." Nate took deep breaths, trying to relax before he went inside. He took in the rich decor in the main hallway. The bright colors and chandelier told him this was exactly where he needed to be. No more dingy apartments with broken pipes. The meeting had gone well. The papers were signed, and Nate finally had the keys in his pocket. He shook the real estate agent's hand. "Thanks again." "It's our pleasure. Your application was impressive." The man smiled as he ushered Nate to the door. Nate smiled as he left and headed back to grab his things. Thankfully, the management had agreed to let him move in as soon as possible. It was the reason he'd wanted this apartment. It had been newly renovated, so no one occupied it at the time. The station was packed as he made his way to the right train. It was a good thing he'd missed the rush hour. There was no way he would have made it on time. The trains were packed, and he had to hold his breath as they made their way back toward Times Square. Too many people made too many smells he could live without. When he climbed off, he noticed the same woman playing her flute right where she'd been before. Her eyes lit up with recognition when she saw him. "Did you get there on time?" she called out. Nate paused before threading his way through the people. "Yes, thankfully." "Good, I'm glad. Better get yourself a new bag before tomorrow. I have a feeling that knot won't last long." She grinned. "Yeah, I should." He caught some glances from other people who watched them, and he backed up. What was he doing? He gave a half wave and left her standing there with a confused expression on her face. Nate stopped to grab some food from the deli on the corner before running upstairs to pack. He wanted to leave before Roger got home. The movers had already taken most of his stuff to a storage unit, so there was only a few things left. Roger planned to move closer to work and had managed to find a furnished apartment, so Nate got to keep the few pieces of furniture they'd collected over the years. And by few, it meant a couch, chair, and bed. He'd have to go find a table and other things. He gathered up the last of his stuff, threw what was left of his food from the fridge in the box, and left the apartment without looking back. There weren't enough memories to make him miss the place. Chapter 2. Allison sat down and leaned against the tiled wall in the subway. It had been a long day, but she'd made enough money for dinner that night and groceries to last a few more days. She closed her eyes for just a moment, but they flew open when she heard a crash and the cursing that followed it. It was the man who had dropped his bag earlier. At least this time everything stayed in the box he'd been carrying. He rubbed his temples and glanced around. "Rough day?" Her voice echoed off the walls of the empty platform. Rush hour had ended, and there was a rare lull between trains because of a delay down the line. He turned and rolled his eyes. "You could say that. Want to tell me about it?" She couldn't believe she was talking to the guy. He'd been anything but nice to her earlier, and it was clear that he didn't approve of her staying down here to play her instrument. "Not really." He ran his hand through his hair. Allison leaned forward, her hands resting on her knees. "Look, you're stuck here and won't be going anywhere for a while, so you can stand up there looking all high and mighty, or you can come and sit down. I don't bite. I promise." The man studied her before pushing his large box over to her. He sat down with the box between them. "You're here all day?" She shrugged. "It depends on the day. I didn't have anything else to do, so I decided I could come down here and entertain people. I'm not sure anyone is actually entertained while they're trying to catch trains." He pulled out his phone and frowned. "No signal." "Well, you are underground. Besides, we're under a steel building right now. We rarely have signal." She glanced in the box. "Get kicked out?" The man glowered, marring his good looks. "How is that your business?" "It's not. It's called being polite." She reached across the box to shake his hand. "I'm Allison, by the way." The man took her hand, and she noted the firm shake. "Nate. And accusing me of being kicked out isn't exactly polite. But since you asked, yes, I did." "Ah, angry wife?" It was all she knew. Angry parents who did nothing but fight. Nate rolled his eyes. "You're really bad at guessing. No, I'm not married. My roommate was a jerk and let the pipes freeze. When they flooded the floor below, the landlord decided to kick both of us out. Good riddance. I wanted to be out of there anyway." "Sounds like it. So where are you headed? Your new place?" Allison grimaced. She really needed to learn to stop being so personal with people. It's what drove her dad crazy about her mom. Always nosy. "I was, until the train was delayed. Don't they know people have places to go?" Nate leaned his head against the wall. Allison laughed. "I'm not sure the subways care. Besides, it's an electrical problem. Not much they can do about it. There's always something. Hopefully it will be done soon." Nate leaned his arm on the box. "Yeah." Allison stared off in the distance. "Sorry you can't get home yet." Nate sighed. "It's fine. I'm just glad to get out of the other place. I don't have any furniture yet anyway." "So where are you going to sleep then?" Allison pulled her sleeves over her hands. It was getting chilly, and she needed to get back to the apartment soon. Sam would be worried if she came home to find Allison gone. "Hotel, floor, anywhere but my old place." He pulled off his gloves. "Here, you need these more than me." Allison took them from him in surprise. "Thank you." "You're welcome. I'll just need them back when the train finally comes." He crossed his arms so his hands were covered. "Do you sleep down here?" Allison snorted. "No." "But you work down here." He looked at her in surprise. "Why would you do that if you didn't have to?" "It's a good place to practice." Allison stood and dropped the gloves in his lap, then picked up her flute case. "I'd better get going. You okay where you are?" A group of people came down the steps laughing loudly about something. Allison wanted to be gone before they realized that the train wouldn't be coming anytime soon. She took a step toward the stairs. "You're leaving?" he asked, surprised. "Well, yeah, I'm done for the night." She glanced over at the group as they muttered at each other. He stood. "I thought... Never mind, I'll be fine." "You can come with me. I know a place to eat upstairs and you can warm up." She should have just left him there. She knew nothing about him, and he hadn't exactly been nice. But he seemed lonely, a feeling she knew all too well. Nate looked back toward the platform before grabbing his box and following her up the stairs. "I need to do something with this box. I don't think they'll like it if I take it into the restaurant." "They'll be fine. I eat there all the time. And they won't mess with you if you're with me. Allison waited for him to catch up before heading into a small diner next to the steps. The food was pretty good, and it gave her a place to escape if the crowds got too big on the platform. Nate set his box on the seat between them in the booth and sat down. He picked up the menu the waitress brought by. Allison smiled as she watched him. She didn't have to look at the menu. She already knew exactly what she wanted to eat. The steak and mashed potatoes are the best, trust me. He drummed his fingers on the table in an uneven rhythm. I guess I'll try that. I'm more in the mood for pasta, though. Ah, well, the white sauce here is fantastic. Allison smiled up at the waitress. She was an elderly woman with a lot of spunk and one of Allison's favorite people. Hey, Bonnie, how are you tonight? I'm great. Did you find another lost puppy here? Bonnie winked at Nate and laughed as he blushed. Train's down, and I figured he didn't want to be down there holding this box of stuff. Allison gestured toward it. Bonnie nodded. Good thought. Okay, what can I get the two of you? The usual for me, and he wants the pasta with white sauce. Allison looked over just in time to see Nate's glare. That's what you wanted, right? Yes. And can I also get a hot chocolate? He handed the menu to Bonnie. Bonnie wrote it down. Of course. I'll be right out. Nate turned to Allison. Lost puppy? Do you do this often? No. She just likes to tease. Allison played with the sugar packet in front of her. So tell me about yourself. What do you do for a living? I'm in advertising. Nate took a drink of the water that Bonnie left in front of them. Wow, that's really cool. So would I know any of your work? Allison felt small. She hadn't made anything of herself yet, and here was this big advertising guy sitting with her. He leaned back and rested his arms on the back of the booth. Probably. I did a few of the Super Bowl ads and worked on a few jingles for Valentine's Day. Allison could tell she hit on what he loved to talk about. That's great. Do you ever have a hard time coming up with ideas? Sometimes, but usually the ideas just flow. My parents always told me I needed to do something like this because I was constantly making up my own jingles for things. He laughed and shook his head. Some of them were pretty terrible, though. Really? Like what? Allison leaned forward. Nate studied her for a moment before shaking his head. Honestly, I don't remember. I just know they were terrible. Allison laughed. Right. You just don't want to tell me. Maybe. So what about you? Do you just play down in the subway all day, or do you have other things you like to do? Nate took a drink of his water, seeming not to notice how much he'd hurt her with the offhand insult. Actually, I only do that when I'm not auditioning. Allison looked down at the sugar packet in her hand. It was smashed and a small hole had formed, spilling sugar onto the table. Really? What kind of auditions? Allison glanced up to see his head cocked to the side, and his expression seemed sincere. I love to perform, anything really. I love to sing, dance, play my flute. I've tried a few places, including Broadway, but haven't found anything yet. Nate frowned. Don't you think it would be better to pick one thing and stick with it? Maybe not spread yourself so thin? Then you'd actually find something and be able to stop the whole subway thing. Tears threatened to spill over, so Allison jumped up. Excuse me. Nate called her name as she hurried blindly into the bathroom, but she didn't turn around. She hid in a stall and let the tears flow. She should never have let him come with her to the diner. And what was she thinking, probing him for his background when she couldn't answer him back? Yes, she was spreading herself too thin, but it was the only way she could think of to get a job in this city. She needed this independence, but living off her roommate and whatever she could get from the subway wasn't cutting it. Maybe she should just go home. Her dad had a job waiting for her if she did. No, not this time. She wouldn't let Nate push her into feeling sorry for herself. The job the next day seemed promising. A small bar where they usually held karaoke had decided to hire a full-time singer, and the bartender had liked what he'd heard on her demo. She took deep breaths and left the stall to check her makeup. After a quick splash of cold water on her face, she felt like she could face him again. Maybe. When she left the bathroom, though, Nate was gone with his box, and Cash sat in the middle of the table for his portion of the meal. Allison pushed down the anger and frustration and focused on the meal in front of her. It was still nice and hot. Bonnie must have just brought it out. She ate several bites before she finally gave up, so maybe she was a little more upset than she wanted to admit. "Not hungry?" Bonnie asked. Allison jumped. "Oh, you scared me. I guess not. Can I get a box?" "Sure, sweetie. And don't feel too bad about him. He'll be back." She winked and walked back to the kitchen. Allison shook her head. She didn't want him to be back. Maybe she'd need to switch to a different platform. That way she wouldn't have to see him again. Bonnie brought a leftover box out and handed Allison the bill. "I know that look. Don't let him get to you. He meant no harm by what he said. You're just tired and hungry. Things will look better tomorrow." "If you say so." Allison dished her food into the box, then pulled out cash to pay Bonnie. She stood and gave her a hug before grabbing her things. "Give John a hug for me, Kay?" "Of course," she smiled. "He'll be sad he missed you." Allison left the diner and walked the 2 blocks to her apartment. It wasn't much, but she couldn't complain. 2 tiny bedrooms branched off of a living room and kitchen. Once her best friend, Sam, had her own place, she'd convinced Allison to come and live in New York. Not that it had taken much convincing. When Allison got back to the apartment, Sam sat in the kitchen with Chinese takeout boxes set on the table. "There you are. How'd it go today?" Allison dropped her things on the couch and sat at the table with her leftovers. "I got a pretty good take today, until the subway broke down at least. How was work? Did you get the raise?" Sam grinned. "Yes, I was going to share my celebratory dinner with you, but I see you brought your own food." "We can share." Allison opened her box, then grabbed some chopsticks. "So, tell me about it." "Well, they were just going to pass over me in the meeting, but Sean stepped in and reminded them that they'd forgotten me. It annoyed Mandy to no end, but she let me have my say. When I went into the research I'd put in, the rest of the group wanted to read my article. Mr. Reynolds gave me the promotion before we left the room." Sam's face glowed with pride. She'd worked hard on the magazine article. Allison squealed and jumped up to hug her. "I knew you could do it." "I didn't." Sam laughed and handed Allison a carton. "Okay, I'll trade you some of this for your steak." "Deal." Allison handed over her carton and dug into the cashew chicken. "What did Mandy do when you got it?" "Screamed, freaked out, nearly got fired." Sam grinned and took a bite. Bonnie went all out with this, didn't she?" "She really did." Allison pulled out some sodas from the fridge and sat at the table. Sam took a soda from Allison and opened it. "Ready for the audition tomorrow?" "Yeah, I think so." She'd been ready for months, but that was besides the point. "I just hope I don't choke when I get up there." "You won't, and you know why? Because you are amazing." Sam grabbed one of the fortune cookies and tossed it to Allison. "Do it." "Fine." She broke the cookie open and read the message, her eyes widening. "A chance meeting opens new doors to success and friendship. That has nothing to do with tomorrow night." Sam took the fortune out of Allison's hands. "You don't know that. You could meet them at the bar." Allison bit her lip. So why did she think of Nate when she read that? It was just coincidence. "Sure. What does yours say?" "Let me see. You will become great if you believe in yourself." "I think this was yours." Sam set it down and laughed. "I don't think so. I think it works great with what you did today." Allison stood and threw the box away. "Ready for a movie?" Sam took the leftovers to the fridge. She held up a DVD and grinned. "You know I'm always ready for The Labyrinth." Allison finished cleaning and dropped onto the couch with a smile as Sam got the movie set up. As the opening scene unfolded, Allison was able to push away the frustrations of the day and nerves about the gig tomorrow and just enjoy the Goblin King. Chapter 3. Nate set the coffee maker back in its spot and grabbed the newspaper off the counter. The warmth coming from the vents was a welcome change to the faulty heater in his old place. The view from his window was much better as well. The lack of furniture was something he'd fix later. He needed to get to the office soon. He changed into his nice navy blue suit and gold vest, then ran his fingers through his hair one more time. His coworkers joked that he overdressed for work, but he wanted to make a good impression on the clients. Today he had a few meetings with different clients that he was hoping to win over. The air was crisp as he made his way to the subway. The longer commute was the one downside to his new place, but that also gave him time to do a little work before he got in. He glanced over the shoe campaign, happy with what he'd come up with. They'd revamped their summer collection, and he hoped he'd get the account. Aaron had several already, so he just had to prove that he could do a better job with this one. Images of Aaron played across his mind. Nate had hoped to persuade her to date him, but she never caved. And then Jake came along and swept her away. Nate shook his head. That ship had sailed, and it did no good to wish it had been different. He tried to date other girls, but they just didn't compare. And then Allison came along. Nate shook his head. Why did he just allow his mind to go there? He tried to forget about what had happened at the diner, but those eyes and that smile... Stop it. Silver Script ad agencies still had their Valentine's Day decorations up when Nate arrived at work. He winked at the receptionist and punched the button on the elevator. 2 women rushed in before the doors could close, and Nate smiled at them. He'd seen them around, but didn't know their names. Aaron, Cassidy, and Deborah were already at work when he set his bag down in his office. Whatever project they were working on had them in early and out late at night. Of course, if he got this account, he'd have the same schedule. Nate poked his head into Deborah's office. Hey, I just wanted you to look over these before the meeting today. Deborah took the papers from him and looked through the sample. I like it. Great job. Thanks. He took back the offered folder. Once this gets approved, I'll have time to start another project as well. Erin rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. Deborah turned to her computer and pulled up the list of current projects. There are a few on here I'll send your way soon. For now, just concentrate on this one. Deborah smiled up at Nate. How's the new place? Nate leaned against the counter. It's nice. Smaller than my other one, but it's in great shape with no leaking pipes. Deborah laughed. That's a bonus. Definitely. I better get going. I'll be watching for those assignments. He smiled at Erin and left the office. Hopefully he didn't get the leftovers after Erin picked the ones she wanted. She was beautiful and did get a great job with all her clients, but just once he wanted to get the better project. The conference room was empty when Nate walked in. He set out the papers for each person and made sure the projector was set up just right. Along the sides of the screen, he set up the larger posters that his assistant had put together so they could keep the ads in mind while they looked at the flowcharts. It was something he constantly reminded Erin to do, but she insisted she had her own way of doing things. As the room began filling, Nate made sure to stand near the door and welcome each person, complimenting them in one way or another. That way, everyone was smiling by the time they sat at the table. Deborah slipped in at the last moment and smiled at him from the back of the room. Nate picked up the remote from the projector and took a drink of his water. Welcome to Silver Script Ad Agency. I hope everything's to your liking. As you know, we're here to discuss the new campaign for the summer lineup. Nate flipped to the first slide. It showed groups of children playing at the park. We want to make sure that everyone not only enjoys the look of the shoe, but that they see how much fun they can have while wearing them. Especially because most kids these days are stuck on their electronics and forget. Nate caught the signal from Deborah and cleared his throat. He was rambling again. Right, the shoe. He turned back to the slides and went through the dialogue, just as he'd rehearsed all night. He had 2 more reminders from Deborah before he got to the end, but otherwise, he thought it went smoothly. And from the smiles on the executives' faces, they were happy as well. Mr. Byrne, the head of Broga Shoes, stood and shook Nate's hand. Wonderful. We love the ideas you have presented. I'll have my secretary get back to you with the details tomorrow. Nate caught the faint Irish lit as he spoke. That's perfect. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions and I'll be happy to help you out. Mr. Byrne nodded and turned toward the door. He followed the other executives out, leaving Nate to revel in the success of the meeting. Nate had worked hard, and it paid off. He just needed to find the perfect people to air in the commercial. He gathered up the extra papers and dumped them in the recycling bin as he left the room. Deborah stood at the end of the hall, talking to Mr. Byrne. He slipped into his office and set his folder on his desk before doing a victory spin in his chair. With any luck, he'd land some bigger accounts after the way that went. Nate closed his browsers and turned off his laptop, frustrated. Deborah had given him smaller accounts yet again. Hadn't she seen what he'd just done in the meeting? He gathered up his things and slid them into his bag, reminding himself to buy a new bag. Aaron was nowhere to be found, so Nate walked quickly to Deborah's office. He had to figure out what was going on. Deborah's office was dark, and it looked like her coat and purse were gone. Of course. Ever since she'd started dating the guy from Walker Apparel, she'd spent less time at work. He sighed and turned to leave, nearly running into Aaron. She left for the day. Did you need anything? A lock of hair fell into her face, and he resisted the urge to brush it back. She was engaged. I just had a few questions about the accounts. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Nate brushed past Aaron and headed for the elevator. Once upon a time, he would have stopped to flirt with her, but it wasn't worth it. He saw how she looked at Jake. Snow had begun to fall, so Nate pulled his head up. He couldn't wait for spring. It had been one awful winter, and he was ready for warmer weather. Someone bumped into him, and he turned to say he was sorry. Nate? The girl asked. Yeah? Nate studied her face to figure out who she was. All right, the New Year's party. Katie, right? The girl beamed. You remembered. How are you? I haven't heard from you for a while. Nate caught the angry edge to her words, even though she smiled as she said them. Yeah, sorry. Work got crazy. How are you? She shrugged. Good. I'm just heading to get some dinner. Want to join me? Sure. He should have said no, but the other option was going home to an apartment that wasn't quite unpacked yet. Besides, he'd had fun with her at the party. They found a small restaurant and ordered their food before finding a place to sit. Katie leaned forward in her seat. So, tell me about your job. What are you working on right now? Her smile seemed sincere enough, but she hadn't acted all that excited at the party that night. Yes, they had fun, but talking hadn't exactly been her strong point. I'm working with Broga Shoes. I'll be in charge of advertising their summer line. Okay, so the contract wasn't signed, but it was only a matter of time. Katie's eyes lit up. Broga Shoes? I have like 3 pairs of their shoes. Think you could get a discount? Ah, so that was it. It's a possibility, but we'll find out the details tomorrow. Most likely it would be just a pair for me. Well, maybe you can get a family discount or something. She went to pick up her order, and Nate watched as she argued about whatever ingredient they'd gotten wrong. What had he seen in her that night? Well, besides the obvious desperation to have a date for the evening, Nate's number was called, so he stood to get his food. Katie was still arguing, and Nate wished he could just leave before it got out of hand. Flashes from the day before came to mind. Being with Allison had been completely different. She seemed to genuinely care about what he said, and not what she could get out of him. Katie dropped her tray on the table and huffed. I can't believe they got the bread wrong. I've been here too many times for them to bring something different. Sorry. Nate took a bite of his French fry. So, do you work nearby then? She waved her hand. I work next door. I just hate the food, so I wait until I'm off my shift to get food somewhere else. Makes sense, I guess. Nate took a big bite of his hamburger, trying to finish quickly. The sooner he could get out of there, the better. Katie rattled off about everything she hated about Italian food, and Nate bit his tongue so he couldn't ask why she would work there if she hated the food. After seeing how she went after the employees, he knew he didn't want to be on her bad side. As soon as Nate took the last bite of his burger, he crumpled up his napkin and dropped it on his tray. I'd love to stay and chat, but I need to get home and unpack. It was great seeing you again. You're already leaving? I thought we'd catch a movie. Katie's hurt expression didn't quite match the anger in her eyes. Sorry, I have movers coming in the morning, and I need to make room for the boxes. Nate stood. I could come and help you. I'm great at unpacking. Her smile was more predatory than friendly, and Nate knew it was time to go. He smiled. I'll have you over when everything is done. I'd hate to have you see how it looks right now. Katie pouted. Fine, but you better call. Nate dropped off his tray and waved as he left. He wouldn't be calling her anytime soon. He took the steps down the subway and waited for the next train back to his apartment. The small studio welcomed him home. The boxes called to him, but he pulled out a chair and got to work on the assignments Deborah had given him. They may have been smaller accounts, but there were still clients, and he was determined to be the best agent they'd ever had. Chapter 4. Allison checked her hair one more time and smoothed down her skirt. The bar was already full, and her stomach wanted to rebel. She could do this. She'd performed countless times since high school, and this was no different. Okay, so this time was in front of adults, and most of them had probably had too much to drink. Eddie's voice sounded over the microphone, and the butterflies in Allison's stomach only got worse. He introduced her, and she pushed herself out onto the stage before she could back out. Lights blinded her, making it hard to see the crowd. She wanted to hug Eddie for making it easier on her. The outgoing part of her took over and helped squelch the nerves. She could do this. She smiled and sat on the stool provided. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. And thanks to Eddie for giving me the shot. Now, who's ready for this? The crowd went wild, helping Allison's adrenaline as she started into the first song. She went with a few well-known songs before moving into her own songs. Adele was a personal favorite, and her songs helped show off Allison's voice more than other artists. As she sang, she could hear whistles and cheers, but otherwise it was just her and the microphone. As she moved into her own song, the crowd quieted. It was exactly what she'd hoped for. The song was slow and soulful, and she wanted them to feel it. After she'd belted out the last few lines, the room was quiet for a moment, then burst into an explosion of applause. Allison couldn't help grinning as she bowed and left the stage. Her hand shook as she took a drink of the water Eddie had provided. Sam pushed the curtain aside and grabbed Allison in a hug, jumping up and down. You were so good out there, the best I'd ever heard. Thanks. I had an absolute blast. Allison took a deep breath and wiped her forehead. Do you think he'll hire me? Are you kidding? I think the people out there would torch the place if he didn't bring you back. Sam stopped and listened for a moment. Hear that? They're calling for more. Allison bit her lip. Should I go back out? Yes, go. Sam grabbed Allison's guitar and shoved it into her hands. Do your thing. Eddie poked his head around the corner. You're wanted out there. Can you do another song? Of course she can. Sam pushed her toward the stage. Knock 'em dead. Allison smoothed out her dress and took another quick drink of water before going back out to the screaming crowd. You want more? As the crowd screamed, she sang 2 more popular songs and got everyone to join in. Sam stood to the side of the stage, grinning as she clapped along. This was a far cry from the Broadway musicals her mom wanted her to be singing, but right now, Allison felt like she was on top of the world. By midnight, most of the crowd had left the bar. Allison and Sam sat at one of the tables near the back, hoping it would give them a little privacy. That was quite the experience. Allison took a drink of her ice water. Sam laughed. You could say that again. 3 encores and then an escort off the stage. Maybe I shouldn't have ended with that song. I'll have to remember to do it in the middle of the set next time. Allison laid her hand on her arms. She was exhausted, and her throat was raw from singing for so long. Eddie set another water next to her and sat in the chair between Sam and Allison. Great job out there tonight. Are you going to be up for another performance tomorrow night? Allison's head jerked up. Does that mean you're hiring me? Of course, unless you don't want to come back. Eddie's eyebrows drew together. Was it too wild? No, it was perfect. Allison grinned. I'd love to come back. Eddie held out his hand for her to shake. Great. We loved having you here. I'll get the contract and have you sign it. And seriously, that was amazing. Allison watched Eddie go, then turned back to Sam. Did I really just get the job? Sam squealed. Yes, you did. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Allison couldn't believe how the night had turned out, but her bones ached and her head pounded after the long evening. Eddie came back with the contract and handed it to Allison. Run through it and let me know if everything sounds good. Allison studied the contract, and while most of it seemed pretty straightforward, her stomach dropped at the amount of time she was supposed to perform each night. Her hand hesitated over the signature line. Is something wrong? Eddie leaned forward. I'm just worried about my voice. Is there any way I can split this? I'll split the pay if I have to. Allison knew it wasn't a smart move to already be offering half her pay to someone else, but she couldn't do it all on her own. Eddie studied her for a moment. Do you have someone in mind? Allison tapped her pen on the table. Not off the top of my head, but I have some friends who could help out until you find someone. They're students, and I've been working with them on the weekends. Sounds good to me. Just give me some of their names. You keep the pay. They can be paid by tips until I hire them. Are you sure? Allison knew her friends would be more than thrilled with any money they could get, but she couldn't just keep all of it. Eddie nodded. You're the moneymaker. I need you here to perform, and I'm willing to pay you enough to keep you here. That would be great, thank you. Allison signed the contract and handed it to him. Sam and Allison left the bar and went back to their apartment. Allison could barely keep her eyes open by the time she reached her bed. Even then, she stared up at the ceiling for an hour longer, excitement still coursing through her. Thoughts of who she could invite the next night worked like counting sheep, and she soon fell asleep. Allison pulled up her collar and walked quickly toward Columbia University. Snow had begun falling soon after she left the apartment, and it was only getting heavier as she made her way through the buildings to the arts building. Sounds of students singing or dancing flowed over her. She smiled to herself as she thought about her performance the night before. While she needed something full-time, she knew she'd enjoy this gig. Hey, Allison, you're early. Tony handed her a badge. How'd it go last night? I got the job. Allison grinned and signed in. I need to find someone to split the time with, though. So if you're looking for something to do in the evenings, I could hook you up. Tony laughed. No, I'm good, thanks. If I think of anyone, I'll let you know. Thanks. See you later. Allison waved and went into the rehearsal room she'd been working in. Class let out and the music was transformed into the chaos of students moving from one room to another. A short blonde girl poked her head into the room. Are you Allison? Yep, you must be Leia. Allison stood and shook her hand. Did you bring a piece to work on? Leia pulled sheet music out of her bag. It's right here. I have an audition in an hour, and I'm worried that I won't hit the high notes. I'm usually an alto, but my professor suggested this song. It's beautiful, but I'm not sure I can do it justice. Allison smiled at Leia and rambled on. Let's see how it sounds. I can't imagine that your professor would suggest it if he didn't think you could do it. Leia stared at the music. Maybe. Let's hear it. Allison sat back in her chair and clasped her hands together. Okay. She backed up, cleared her throat, and began singing. Her professor had been right. Her voice was perfect for the song, and while there were a few parts where she needed a little bit of work, it brought tears to Allison's eyes. Leia brought a spirit to the music that not many could replicate. When Leia finished, Allison clapped. That was beautiful. If this doesn't move the judges, I don't know what will. Leia beamed. Really? You don't think it's too high? We'll work on the spots that were a little rough, but I think you need to sing this song. And when you're done with your audition, come back and talk to me. I have a possible job for you. If your parents will let you, I mean. For the rest of the session, they worked on the higher notes and a few of the other spots where she'd gone out of tune. By the time she had to leave to make the audition, Leia had the song smoothed out. Allison wished her luck and watched as she hurried out of the room and down the hall. If Leia didn't get into Juilliard with that audition, they were crazy. Allison helped 2 more students before it was time for her own class. She'd been so excited to get into the class, and it was exactly what she'd hoped it would be. Thoughts of what Nate had said about keeping one skill still grated at her, but she pushed them away. As soon as everyone had stretched, the professor put the class into partners, and they went over the Viennese waltz. Allison allowed her mind to wander as her body flowed through the movements. Her partner led her around the floor, counting to himself. The professor would stop a couple here and there to critique the way they held themselves, or if the steps weren't quite right. By the time the song ended, Allison's legs burned from the quick movements. She thanked her partner and backed up to the wall until the professor announced their next dance. By the time class was over, Allison was ready to drop with exhaustion. There had been little downtime as they went from one dance to the next. She barely caught herself when she was attacked by a squealing Leia. "Whoa! I take it things went well?" Allison readjusted her bag and brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "Yes, thank you. They seemed to be really impressed, and I was able to hit every single note." Allison grinned. "I knew you could. Congratulations. You'll have to let me know if you get in." "Oh, and I talked to my parents about the job you were talking about. Can you tell me a little more? I could really use the cash." Allison pulled her coat tighter. "Let's get out of the snow. Where are you headed next?" "I'm done for the day. I was just going home." "Great. We can walk together." Allison gave Leia the details as they hurried toward the subway. By the time they caught their separate trains, Leia had agreed to talk to her parents about it. Allison waved from the train as it pulled away from the platform. She wasn't sure how she made it through the evening with how tired she was, but at least she'd have help after tonight, as long as Eddie agreed to hire Leia. Chapter 5. Nate couldn't help the disappointment he felt when he saw that Allison wasn't on the platform again. It had been over a week, and the guilt from leaving her at the diner had been eating at him ever since, which made no sense. It's not like she was the first girl he'd ever dated and not called again. There was just something about her easygoing, open, and friendly manner that made his mind keep going back to her. He took the steps up to the street and checked his phone again for the directions. There was a new act at his friend's bar, and Eddie had been pestering him to come and check it out. With all the new ads that Nate needed to have ready for the beginning of spring, this was the first time he'd been able to get away. And even then, he had several hours of work to do that night to prepare for the meeting the next day. The thought of just staying home ran through his mind, but it was pushed aside quickly. His mind needed a break for a bit. Music blasted as Nate walked through the door, and the smell of old alcohol, chicken wings, and fried food filled his senses. It had been way too long since he'd been here last. He pushed his way through the crowd, checking out a few of the girls as he went past them. Eddie stood at the bar and nodded when he saw Nate coming toward him. He finished the order and wiped his hands. "Hey man, you made it! What can I get you?" Eddie grinned and grabbed a glass from the counter. "Just water for now. What's the occasion? It's packed." Nate sat on one of the stools and smiled at a blonde girl next to him. She smirked and turned away. Eddie gestured toward the stage. "I told you, she's amazing, and word spreads fast." "Where'd you find her?" Nate took the glass from Eddie and took a drink. "The subway. I was coming home from—" "Are you okay?" Eddie shot Nate a curious look. Nate coughed on the water he'd inhaled. "Couldn't be her, right?" I'm fine." "Sure. Anyway, I better go get the show started. The crowd is getting restless." Eddie left, glancing over his shoulder at Nate as he went around the corner. People made their way toward the stage and found a place to stand. Nate stayed where he was and sipped on his water. Maybe he just should have gotten something else to drink. Music started and Nate glanced over. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw a young girl walk out on stage and sit on the stool in the center. It wasn't Allison, but Eddie was right. She was amazing with her rich alto voice. She couldn't be more than 18 years old. A glance to the side proved him right. A couple stood there with pride written all over their faces, obviously her parents. Eddie came back to stand behind the bar. "Want some more water?" "I think I'll order some wings and a drink with those." Nate gestured toward the stage. "You're right. She's fantastic." "Her?" "Nah, that's Leia. She's the opening act. Allison will be out in a few minutes." Nate nearly spit his drink. He could leave right now, but he hadn't heard any of it yet, and Eddie would wonder what was going on. He'd stay just long enough to satisfy Eddie, and then find an excuse to leave. A date, maybe. It's not like that would be unbelievable. He normally had a date every weekend. He just hadn't felt like it since the day he left Allison in the diner. The girl finished to a standing ovation and left the stage to sit with her parents. Nate wanted to leave, but his promise to stay, and more of a little curiosity, held him there. He left her once already, and he obviously still regretted it. Maybe if he apologized, he could move on with life. After a few glowing words from Leia, Allison sat and strummed a few chords on her guitar. She started a popular song, and Nate was mesmerized. Her voice was rich, and by her expression as she sang, she loved what she did. Nate tore his gaze away from her and glanced around to see that he wasn't the only one affected by her singing. When the song ended, Nate jumped as the crowd erupted in applause. He joined in the clapping and leaned back in his chair, relaxing to enjoy the show. Allison sang a few more songs before people from the audience began shouting out the names of songs, making her laugh. "Whoa, slow down, I'll get to your song." Nate shook his head, amazed at her calm manner. It shouldn't have surprised him after how quickly she warmed up to him in the subway, but there were a lot of people in here all wanting her attention. During one of the faster songs, Eddie started playing with the spotlight, flashing it around the stage and into the crowd. Allison stood and grabbed the microphone, caught up in the song she was singing. Her eyes fell on Nate, and she stopped for a split second before moving on. But for the rest of the song, she kept glancing over. Nate cursed under his breath. He should have left. Now he was just making a mess of her performance. Right after the song was over, Allison excused herself and went backstage. Nate leaned forward and buried his face in his hands. Eddie went back for a few seconds before coming back out. "Let's give Allison a big hand. She's not feeling well, so we'll end the night with a little karaoke." As soon as Eddie went back to the bar, Nate stood and walked over. "Hey, I'm taking off. You're right. She's fantastic." "I thought you'd like her." Eddie scrubbed the counter. "I don't get it, though. She usually doesn't get flustered like this." Guilt overwhelmed Nate, but he squashed it down. "Maybe she just needed a break." "Maybe." Eddie wiped out a glass. "I don't think that's it, though. This was the first time I used those lights. I hope I didn't scare her." Nate shrugged. "You could have. You're pretty scary." Eddie chuckled. "I'm sure that's it." The crowd slowly trickled out of the bar, murmuring about the disappointment that the show was already over. Nate stood to follow them out. Maybe he could still catch a movie that night. "So, you're leaving again, huh? Is that all you do?" Allison's voice broke through the noise, stopping Nate in his tracks. He turned. "Hey, Allison." The fury in her eyes was a complete contrast to the friendly demeanor he'd first met. "Why are you here?" Nate nodded toward Eddie. "He told me to come. He said a new singer had just started and I needed to hear her." Allison stopped. "He did?" "He told me you were amazing. I have to say I agree, although I didn't expect it to be you." Nate shoved his hands in his pockets. Allison stiffened. "And now that you know it is?" Nate studied her. He'd already thought she was beautiful, but the fire in her eyes just made her even more intriguing. "I may come back. I was impressed. You have an amazing voice." "What? Was it more than you'd expect from a girl who performs in the subway?" She huffed and folded her arms. "Hey, I didn't say that. But since you asked, it's better than I expected." Nate backed up. "It was nice to see you again. Maybe I'll see you around." Nate left the bar feeling a little lighter than he had in days. He hadn't exactly apologized, and she didn't seem like she'd be willing to accept it anyway. There was something about talking to her that had brightened his spirits. Now, if only he could get his mouth to stop saying stupid stuff, maybe he could have a chance with her. Nate winked at the receptionist as he headed up to his office. It was later than he'd hoped, but the shoot for Broga's shoes had gone longer than planned. He had a couple of calls, and then he needed to pick up his date. Allison wouldn't leave his head, and he was desperate for a distraction. It had been a few days since that night in the bar, but he couldn't get past the hurt in her eyes. The office was mostly empty as he walked down the hallway to his desk. His laptop blinked on as he dropped into his chair and called the modeling agency and photographers he'd need for the next couple of weeks. He sent out the email to Mr. Byrne with the information for the shoot the next day and moved on to the next account. "Hey, Nate?" Deborah's voice made him jump. She stood in the doorway leaning against the wall. "Yeah?" He was surprised she came to his office. Usually, she called him into hers. "Mr. Byrne is a little concerned with how things are going with the shoot," Deborah frowned. "He's thinking of pulling it." Nate felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "What? We're doing exactly what he okayed. He was there this morning and loved it." Deborah put a hand up. "I know. Look, I know you can make him change his mind. I talked him into having dinner with you tonight. He wants to go back to his roots, and it's your job to figure out how to do it." So much for his date. He closed his computer. "What time?" 8 o'clock. I sent you the rest of the details. Good luck." Deborah moved to leave but turned around. "This account is huge. Do whatever you can to keep it." "Will do." He was already giving up a date, but he needed this to work. A glance at the clock told him he needed to get going if he was going to make it to dinner. The directions were to an old Irish pub. Nate shook his head. The lengths he went for this job. But he could use a drink, and he'd heard this was a great place to get one. As he headed for the elevator, he pulled out his phone to text his date. He hated ending it over a text, but he'd have to run, and it wouldn't have time for a phone call. Of course, it also meant he wouldn't have to hear the disappointment in her voice. It took a few minutes to snag a taxi. They pulled out into traffic just as his date replied, saying they'd have to go out later that week. Nate smiled. That was a lot better than he expected. He texted back, telling her that he'd contact her as soon as he could. The pub was small, and when he opened the door, he was surprised to see the neat tables and quiet atmosphere. He'd expected something like Eddie's where you could barely hear over anyone else. Mr. Byrne waved him over to a booth where he sat with a drink. "Glad you found the place. Why don't you order and then we can get down to business?" Mr. Byrne smiled and gestured toward the menu. Nate sat across from him and looked through the options. "What do you suggest?" "The stew is my favorite, but a lot of people like the steak as well." Mr. Byrne waved a waitress over. "I think I'll try the stew." Nate smiled at the waitress, but she didn't respond as she wrote down his order and walked away. Mr. Byrne chuckled. "Don't mind her. She usually works in the kitchen, but they were short-staffed." "You eat here often, then?" Nate glanced around, noting the old knickknacks that covered the walls and shelves. "It's my nephew's place. He took it over from his dad." Mr. Byrne studied Nate. "So, what did you think about the shoot today?" Nate hesitated before answering. "It doesn't matter what I thought if you weren't happy with it. I'm there to make you money by selling the product in the best way we can. I think this commercial could do that, but if it's not what you want, we'll change it." "It's not that I didn't like the concept. Your ideas were wonderful. I just didn't feel like it was the way I wanted to go with the ad." He leaned back and folded his arms, staring off in the distance. "Do you know much about the plight of the Irish here in the U.S.? "A little. Why?" Nate had studied it in school, but had never cared to learn more about the culture, and at that moment, he regretted the decision. "We had to leave Ireland to escape the famine and try to make a new life for ourselves here. But we had to deal with a lot of the same starvation once we got here as well. It wasn't easy." The waitress brought out Nate's stew, and this time she smiled. "You just had to get him started, didn't you?" "I guess so." Nate took a bite of the stew. "Wow, this is really good, thank you." She beamed. "Of course. Let me know if you want any more." Mr. Burns smiled as she left the table. Then he tried some of it as well. She outdid herself this time. One of the better recipes I've had here. Nate savored the perfectly cooked vegetables and the rich broth as he finished off the bowl. He pushed it to the side, wanting more, but it was filling and he didn't think he could eat another bite. What did you have in mind for the commercial? I still trust you to come up with it. Take a few days and tour the Irish memorials here to learn more about my people. I'll be back at your office on Monday and we'll discuss where we want to go from there. Mr. Byrne dropped a pamphlet on the table. Call me if you have any questions. All right, I'll see you Monday then. Nate dropped some cash on the table and stood, feeling dismissed. His head spun as he went back outside to find a cab. What had just happened? Just a couple hours before, he was sure that the contract was going perfectly, and then he was told it wasn't what they wanted. Anger and frustration flowed through him as he stood in the light snow that had begun to fall. And where were the taxis? It wasn't even all that late. After waiting for another minute, Nate swore and went to find the subway entrance. He'd only been in that part of the city a few times, and he had no idea what line he was even supposed to get on. The angry thoughts of a wasted evening beat against his head with each step he took. Snow dropped down the back of his collar, and it made him angrier. No one had rejected his work like this before. The idea of going to work in the morning with this mess over his head was irritating, but he had no choice. There were other contracts he had to work on. Maybe he could pass on this account and let someone else deal with it. The subway platform was full when Nate finally made it down to the train. He checked the schedule to find the best route home, and one of the stops stuck out to him. 3 stops down, he could get off and go to Eddie's bar. Maybe he could get lucky and find another date there. At least then the night wouldn't be totally wasted. Chapter 6. Allison bowed and waved at the crowd, and she recognized several familiar faces from the past shows. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow night. Allison went backstage to put her guitar into her case. Her throat was parched from singing, and she looked forward to a drink with Eddie and Sam before heading home. The crowd had thinned out while she had been in the back, and it was easier to get to the bar. She dropped into a seat next to Sam. I'm parched. Please tell me you ordered me a drink. Are you kidding me? Sam gestured behind Allison. I don't have to say anything. You order a ginger ale after every concert. Eddie set a large glass in front of Allison. Great job. You really had them going during that last song. Another new one? Yeah, I wrote it last night. She didn't mention that it had something to do with the guy she'd met on the subway a week ago. She took a drink of her ginger ale, relishing the burning as the ginger went down her throat. It was exactly what she needed. Whoa, slow down, you're gonna choke. Eddie laughed. Want another one? Allison nodded and stood. Just bring it out. I'll be back in a sec. She weaved through the tables toward the bathroom and stopped in her tracks when she saw Nate sitting at the bar with a blonde girl hanging on his every word. He looked up just then and stopped talking. Allison jumped, pushing herself to keep going for the bathroom. He wasn't worth it. They'd barely even talked. But curse those blue eyes and his crooked smile. They still got her heart racing. Allison washed her hands and stared into the mirror, trying to convince herself that she was fine without him. After all, she'd already survived 23 years with no Nate in her life. But when he still sat at the bar when she left the bathroom, she knew it was a hopeless cause. She pushed past him and sat next to Sam. What has you all flustered? Sam asked. Nothing. Ready to go? Allison drowned the glass Eddie had refilled for her and immediately regretted it as it burned and made her eyes water. Eddie sat next to Sam, setting his arm on her chair. Don't tell me you need another drink already. Allison sputtered, trying to catch her breath. No, I'm fine, thanks. You've met my friend Nate? Eddie nodded toward Nate as he sat next to Allison. Yeah, I've met him. The room suddenly seemed to be lacking in oxygen, and Allison couldn't help checking her hair. She had to be a mess after the performance. Nate leaned forward, accidentally bumping into Allison. She hasn't quite forgiven me, and I don't blame her. I was kind of a jerk. Kind of? You ditched me. Speaking of which, where's the blonde girl? Allison snapped. She could have kicked herself for how she treated him, but he was infuriating and gorgeous. A very annoying combination. She had other plans. Besides, she wasn't my type. Nate played with the straw wrapper that sat on the table. Allison snorted. So, she had class? Allison, stop it! Sam hissed. No, she's right. Nate stood and threw some cash on the table. That's for my drink. See you later. Allison watched him stalk out of the bar and instantly felt terrible for how she treated him. She caught the look on Sam's face. Yeah, I know. Before Eddie or Sam could say anything else, she stood and grabbed her things, then ran out of the bar. The crowd on the streets had lessened, and she could see Nate's head towering over the others around him. Nate! She called out. When he didn't turn, she hurried after him. Nate, please stop! A few other heads turned, but Nate kept walking. With a growl of frustration, she pushed past people until she was nearly to him. This time, when she called for him, he turned. The look of surprise turned to a glare. Wait, please stop. Allison ran the last couple of yards and stopped, trying to catch her breath. I'm sorry. I was rude. Nate took Allison's guitar from her. You're not the only one. Where are you headed? Home, I guess. It's a few blocks away. I can take that. She reached out to take the guitar, but he pulled it away. I'll take it. It's the least I can do after ditching you. He gestured for her to walk and then caught up to her. You sang great tonight. Thanks. How long were you there? Visions of him with the blonde made her cringe, but she pushed it away. Nate shrugged. I caught a few songs. I've never heard a few of them before. They were mine. Allison turned the corner and stopped at her apartment. This is me. Thanks for walking me home. You're welcome. He handed back the guitar. See you tomorrow. Allison hesitated. Are you okay? I mean, besides me being rude? Yeah, I'm fine. Just had a crazy day that turned into a disaster. Nate shoved his hands into his pockets. Allison should have just let it go, but she couldn't. She knew those bad days all too well. Anything I can do to help? I doubt it. I mean, not that I don't want it. I just have to start all over on a project and I have no clue where to even begin. Nate ran his fingers through his hair, making it stand on end. Well, maybe it'll help to bounce some ideas off someone. Allison smiled. Want to talk about it? Nate hesitated. I guess. I just need to drop off my stuff and then we can go somewhere else to talk. Allison fumbled with the keys and shoved them in the lock. I'll be right down. Nate frowned. Maybe I'll go. I need to get to work. I thought you were stuck. Allison's finger hovered over the elevator up to her room. I am. I just can't afford to just sit here. Allison rolled her eyes. I'll be 3 minutes at the most. That is, if the elevator works. The elevator opened and Allison stepped in. The groan as it started up matched her own. She really needed to start taking the stairs. It wouldn't take any longer. She unlocked the door and dropped her stuff in her room. A quick glance at the mirror told her she needed to brush her hair. She quickly redid the ponytail and then reapplied her makeup and put on a dab of perfume. They were talking business, but that didn't mean she couldn't look her best while she helped him. As the elevator door opened, Allison half expected Nate to be gone, but he stood across the hallway staring at one of the tacky paintings the apartment had put up. He turned and smiled, his dimples showing. Ready? Allison adjusted her jacket to protect herself from the cold. I guess so. So what is this campaign you're working on? Allison sat on one of the old chairs in the lobby and patted the one next to her. Nate sat down and pulled out his phone. Ever heard of the Broga shoes? Allison's eyes widened. They're your clients? I love their shoes. You and the rest of the country. Anyway, I had this great campaign all put together and we had the shoot today. Nate handed her his phone with pictures from the shoot. He went on to explain everything that Mr. Byrne had said. Allison took the phone away from him. These look great, but I can see what he means. While it's good, this commercial is pretty much like every other shoe commercial out there. Nate took the phone and shoved it back into his pocket. I just can't figure out what I want to do that will embrace his background. You just have to do what he suggested and visit a few places that were established by the Irish. I bet you can come up with something that way. I know. I just don't know where to start. And besides, I have other clients who need me. Nate leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. Allison stood and held out a hand. Come on. Where are we going? Nate took her hand and stood. Just wait. Allison led him out of the building and headed north. I had to study this in high school and it stuck with me. The Irish played a big part in the building of the city, so there are several locations to choose from. Are you from here? He asked. Allison shook her head. No, I just had a teacher who was obsessed with anything Celtic, including those who immigrated to the U.S. Oh, here we are. The small bar was nearly empty when they went inside. Music played in the background and the bartender waved as she walked past. You're out late. Hey, Philip. Just teaching my friend a little history. Allison gestured toward Nate. We won't be long. The bartender nodded and wiped down the bar in front of him. Allison made her way to the back and found a booth for them to sit. So, do you know everyone in this area? Nate laughed. Nope, but Sam and I come here when we're sick of studying for finals or want to get out of the apartment. She set her purse next to her on the bench and folded her arms on the table. Nate glanced around the room. What does this have to do with the Irish culture? This building was built by the Irish, but really, I just wanted one of their Irish roses. Allison smiled up at Philip, who had brought her a drink. Thanks. Can you get one for him as well? Irish rose? Nate raised his eyebrows. If we'd wanted drinks, we should have stayed at Eddie's. Trust me. She took a sip of her drink. The real Irish rose has whiskey in it, but we like this version, and he makes the best. Usually it's for kids, but we stumbled onto it when we needed a serious study break. Philip set the drinks in front of Nate. Enjoy. Nate took a drink and rubbed his jaw. Oh man, that's sour. Allison laughed. Yeah, it is, but you get used to it. I can see why you drink it. Talk about a wake-up call. He took another drink. Now, let's make this happen. If you want my help, we can visit a few of the other places to help you learn a little more about the culture. Or I can just tell you where they are and you can figure it out for yourself. Allison had a couple of classes in the morning, but she was always up for a tour in the city. Nate stared down at his drink for a moment before looking up into her eyes. Why are you helping me? Because I'm a decent human being? Allison smiled. My guess is that you do the same thing with every single ad. You look at what sells best, throw it together, and then present it. It's just not quite as easy this time because he wants you to think, right? I put more thought into it than just throwing it together. I have to study that particular line and what works best. But yes, it's usually something similar. But that's why I'm one of the top agents for SilverScript. Allison can tell she'd hit a nerve, and she tried to feel bad for it, but she'd just proven her point. She leaned forward. You're the top agent because you can sell your campaign, not necessarily because it's the best idea. From what I could see of your shoot today, it's a commercial that anyone would be happy with. Now he just wants more. I don't blame him. Nate's eyes narrowed. Do you know anything about advertising, or are you just arguing to argue? Just arguing. But I also know that I'm right. Give his idea a chance. I'm assuming you can't afford to lose him as a client. It's time to stretch your usual methods and do something completely different. That's what it's all about, right? Finding the newest and greatest way to sell something so people don't forget that brand. Well, yes, but he should have told me that from the beginning. We put a lot of work and money into the shoot today. Nate pushed his drink away. Allison nodded. You're right, but it's possible that it took seeing it for him to realize how important it was to go the other way. Nate studied her for a moment. Maybe, but I still have no idea what to do. I have 2 classes in the morning and then I can go with you. That is, if you're willing to let me go. Nate's eyebrows shot up. You have classes? Where are you going to school? Columbia University. Wow, that's great. My sister wanted to go there. How about if I meet you around 11? That works. Meet me in the arts building and we can head out. Allison pulled out her wallet and grabbed some cash for her drink. I better get to bed. Do you know your way back to the subway from here? Nate stood. I'll be fine, and thank you. Allison smiled. Of course. They walked out of the bar together and parted ways. Allison looked back to watch Nate walk around the corner. This wasn't how she planned to end her night, but it had been exactly what she needed. Chapter 7. Nate closed his laptop with a little more force than necessary. This was the second client that had told him they wanted something a little different. His head pounded from the phone call he just had. The ad had already been sent to the print for the clothing line, and yet they wanted to change a few of the layouts. A glance at the clock told him that if he didn't leave soon, he'd miss meeting Allison. But was it worth it? Of course it was. Nate had to make this shoe contract work, or his job would be on the line, especially after telling Deborah that she needed to pull this other ad. The phone rang as Nate shoved his arms into his coat. Hello? Hello? This is Melinda from the New York Talent Agency. I just found out that Brad can't make it in for the 4:30 shoot. He had a family emergency. Nate gripped the phone tighter. Thank you for letting me know. We'll take care of it. It was all he could do not to slam the phone down. He slipped his bag over his shoulder. That was the last time he'd used that modeling agency. It was the third cancellation that month. He poked his head into Aaron's office. Hey, is Jake available for a job later today? It killed Nate to ask for Aaron's boyfriend to take over the job, but he was good and he was usually up for any job that came his way. Aaron grabbed a sticky note and pen. Pretty sure he's supposed to be done with this other ad by noon. What's the job? It's a clothing ad. I know he doesn't usually do those, but I had yet another cancellation. Nate readjusted his bag. Remind me not to call them again. I'll check with Jake, but I'm sure he can be there. Thanks. Aaron's smile lit up her face. Nate nodded and hurried out of her office. He was really pushing it by the time and had to run down the steps at the platform so he wouldn't miss the train toward Columbia. The car was packed, and Nate had to stand next to a man who he was pretty sure hadn't showered for a month. He did his best to hold his breath until he was able to climb off and gasp for air. He hurried up the steps and toward the building where Allison was supposed to be waiting. He pulled out his phone and found the room number where they were supposed to meet. When he didn't see her standing there, he searched the crowd to make sure he hadn't written down the wrong number. When he couldn't see her in the hallway, he checked through the classroom window. A waltz played as two people moved across the floor. Allison and her partner danced in rhythm, almost seeming like they were one. When the song ended, she stopped and laughed, hugging her partner. Nate backed up away from the door, feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. It wasn't like he wanted anything to happen between them, but part of him had hoped something would. The door opened shortly after, and Allison stopped laughing at something when she saw Nate. Oh, hey! Sorry I was late. We wanted to run through the dance one more time. It's fine. I can go alone if you have something else you need to do. Nate checked his watch and wondered if Aaron had gotten hold of Jared. Maybe he should have checked up on that instead of coming here. No, I'm ready to go. See you later, Darren. Allison slipped her backpack over her shoulders and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The other guy left, which helped Nate relax a little. You two were amazing in there. Thanks. I'm hoping we can enter the dance contest next month, but I'm not sure I'll be ready. Allison sighed. Really? Nate raised his eyebrows. You were in perfect rhythm with each other. Allison made a face. It may have looked that way, but there were several little things that were off. Anyway, are we ready to go? Nate nodded. Where do you want to go first? Allison headed out of the building, and Nate glanced back toward the classroom. She could dance and sing better than most people he'd seen, and she was friendly toward him even though he ditched her. What else was she going to surprise him with? Well, I was thinking of going to the Irish Hunger Memorial first. It's supposed to snow tonight, so I want to make sure we can get over there. Allison pulled her coat tighter. Good idea. Where is it? Nate followed her down the stairs to the subway. It's south of here. Allison found a spot near the back of the train and slid into a seat. Nate sat next to her. Have you been there before? Allison shook her head. No, but I've been wanting to go. My professor talked a lot about it in class. It has this really cool old cottage that they made using stones from all over Ireland. Wow, that's amazing. The train began to move and Allison stared out the window. Nate studied her face, comparing her to the other girls he normally spent time with. She was opposite of anyone he dated before, and it intrigued him. Where they usually had their hair and makeup done perfectly, she had her hair in a ponytail and little to no makeup. She also seemed to enjoy life instead of demanding that others entertain her like the other girls did. She turned and smiled at him. Do I have something on my face? No, I was just thinking. Nate pulled out his phone, hoping for a distraction. Right. She leaned over his shoulder. What's that game? Nate turned the screen on his phone so he could show her the game he'd started. It's just an arcade-type game. You have to hit the balls to clear the level. Allison watched him play a couple of levels before holding out her hand. Can I try? Sure, just don't beat my high score. Nate laughed and gave her his phone. He leaned closer so he could watch her play and give tips. Oh, wait, don't touch! Allison laughed as she lost another life on the level. I take it you don't want to hit the bomb. No, that would be bad. The level had been driving him crazy for a week. Here, let's start at the first level. Man, you really think I'm hopeless, don't you? Allison glared, but the light in her eyes told Nick she was joking. Hey, you said it. Nate grinned and scrolled down to the first level. Here you go. Allison sighed and played through the first several levels before glancing up into his eyes. Now do you believe me? I guess so. Nate stretched and laid his arms across the back of the seat, hoping Allison wouldn't mind. But she was too into the game to react. That was a first. Most of the girls he dated laughed at the thought of playing video games, and it was refreshing to find a girl who obviously loved them. They took turns trying the levels before they announced a stop just before Battery Park. Allison's head jerked up. Wow, we're there already? Yep, that's the joy of video games. They're perfect time wasters. Nate stood and made his way to the train door so he could climb out. So you play that on the train every day? Allison followed the crowd out of the subway, and Nate hurried to catch up. Not every day. I try to get work done when I can. Nate readjusted the collar on his coat to keep the cold off his neck. The temperature had dropped in the hour they'd been on the subway. I think it's a good idea you decided to do this first. Allison smiled and headed for the park. I just hope we have time to see everything before we get snowed on. They made their way through the park until they came to the ruins of an old cottage. The land lay barren around it, adding to the feeling of the place. Nate stared at the bricks as a picture of what it once was came to mind. The Irish fled their country during the famine and came here, nearly doubling New York's population, and we treated them terribly. Allison stood there with her arms folded tightly. I can't even imagine what it must have been like. Most people fled here for one reason or another. Nate caught the glare on Allison's face. Sorry, I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be remembered. It's a tragedy, and this memorial is a good reminder. Nate trailed off, knowing that anything else he said would make him sound like a complete jerk. Allison looked up at him. You just what? Want to know why no one else has memorials? Nate shrugged. Pretty much. They do, but they're not who you're concentrating on, remember? Allison gestured toward the cottage. Did you know those stones were imported from each of Ireland's counties? That's a huge deal. You're right. Nate walked along the path, studying the cottage. Thank you for bringing me here. You're welcome. Let's head to the next place. Allison walked toward the street. Nate glanced back at the memorial, knowing that it needed to be part of the commercial somehow. He couldn't wait to see the next part of the tour. Nate watched as Allison spoke with one of the tour guides at the Battery Park fort left over from the War of 1812. He closed his eyes, imagining the millions of immigrants who had come through the area when they'd entered the country. Allison walked over, her eyebrows scrunched together. They say there's nothing left of it. I wish you could have used this place in your commercial. It's so fascinating. We can make it work. Nate turned and left the park. They'd visited a few more memorials before ending on this one, and by that time it was dark, and Nate was starving. Ready for some dinner? Yes, and I know a great place to go. Come on. Allison pulled him toward a building nestled among the large buildings surrounding it. Celtic music blasted as they opened the door. Allison took Nate by the hand and led him through the crowd, having no idea what her touch was doing to him. They sat at a small table near the corner and had to shout over the noise to order their food. Nate looked around at the decor, and while the other restaurants had been full of Irish memorabilia, this one was covered in wall-to-wall flags, prints, and knickknacks. A live band sat in the corner, playing while the customers danced in the center of the room. How is it that you know where so many bars are in this city? Nate raised an eyebrow. I applied to work at this one, but they decided my soul wasn't Celtic enough. It doesn't keep me from coming back, though. The food is to die for. Allison watched the dancers, her face softening as she followed the movements. They missed out. Nate smiled at her blush. I'm serious. Your voice is beautiful. But I think they're right. You belong at Eddie's bar. Thank you. I'm actually relieved to be working there. It's so much closer to home and it's a lot less intimidating. The food came and silence settled between them as they ate. It was a peaceful silence that Nate welcomed. Usually his date rambled on while he pretended to listen. He pushed those thoughts out of his mind. He didn't need to think about anyone else when he was with her. When he was done, he leaned forward so she could hear him better. Do you work tonight? If so, we should probably get back because it's getting late. Nope, I'm free. Leia took over. She took the last bite of her mashed potatoes. Unless you want to get rid of me. Nate laughed. No, I enjoyed today. I was actually hoping it didn't have to end yet. Allison stood and held out her hand. Come on. Where are we going? Nate reached for his coat. No, you won't need that. Not yet. She took his hand and pulled him out to the dance floor. Nate took a step back. I don't dance. Come on. It's been a long day and I think you need the chance to relax. She took his other hand. Ever done an Irish dance before? I told you, I don't dance. Nate knew a few people were staring, and he wanted to be anywhere but on the dance floor at the moment. Allison laughed. Just humor me, please. She ran him through a few steps, and Nate attempted to do the same moves. See? You're not so bad. Thanks. Nate watched Allison's feet as they continued on, and by the time the song ended, he almost had it down. The only thing that kept him on the floor and not running for the exit was the feel of Allison's hand in his, and the excitement that lit up her eyes. The song ended and a slower song came on. When Allison stuck out her bottom lip, Nate sighed. Fine. How do you do this one? She grinned. Watch closely. This one is a little trickier. Instead of holding hands to dance like they did before, they did the Irish jig in a line. Well, Allison and everyone else did. Nate tripped over his own feet more than once. At first, he was frustrated, but when everyone continued to encourage him, he relaxed and laughed along with everyone as he kept going. When the song ended, everyone cheered and Allison threw her arms around his neck. You did it! She pulled back, but didn't let go as they stared into each other's eyes. Nate swallowed hard before going back to the table to take a break. He wanted to keep holding her. He loved how she felt in his arms and how her eyes sparkled when she looked up at him. The smell of her shampoo and the way of her hair framed her face. But he couldn't do that right now, not with her. She was a good friend, and relationships always mess that up. Allison joined him at the table, but the energy that usually burst from her was gone. She played with a straw in her drink. Ready to go? Yeah, I have work that needs to get done, and I think I have a good idea for this commercial. Nate pulled out some cash and dropped it on the table. The smile on Allison's lips didn't quite reach her eyes. That's great. They left the pub and walked in silence for a block before Nate couldn't handle it. Thank you for helping me out today. I had a lot of fun. I did too. I'd been wanting to visit the memorial ever since I heard about it. Allison stared off into the distance. This is my stop here. Nate took a few dollar bills from his wallet and held it out to Allison, then flagged down a cab. The next subway to your place isn't for another few blocks, and I'd feel bad having you walk on your own. Allison smiled weakly. I can pay for myself, but thank you. Nate watched as she climbed in, the crisp bills still in his hand. He'd only wanted to protect their friendship, but he was pretty sure that he'd messed it up even more. Chapter 8. Allison wiped a tear from her eye as she climbed out of the cab and hurried up to her apartment. Things had been going so well, and she thought that Nate was having fun too. And the way he'd looked at her, she was sure he'd felt something, until he pulled away. The door slammed harder than she tried, but she didn't care. It was her fault for trusting him. She should have known better than to believe he would share her feelings. Thoughts of the blonde girl from the bar flashed through her mind. Sure, he'd walked her home that night instead of going home with the girl, but that's because he'd been rejected by her. Sam came home soon after and set the groceries on the counter. Hey, how'd it go today? Don't ask. That good, huh? Sam put the milk in the fridge. Eddie told me Nate's a good guy, but so far he's ditched you, and then did whatever he did tonight. I think Eddie's blind. Allison took the small tub of Rocky Road ice cream from Sam and opened the lid. He's a good guy. I saw that today. He's just not into me, which is fine. I have to concentrate on my dance anyway. How was class? Sam stole a spoonful of ice cream from the tub. Better. We're getting it, but I'm still worried about a couple of things. I just wish Darren would agree to a few extra practices. Since you have nothing else on your plate, Sam leaned back on the couch. Eddie asked me to dinner tomorrow night. Allison squealed. That's great! Maybe. What if he turns out like Nate? They might be good friends, but I really don't think he's anything like Nate. But then, I only know him through business, so I could be completely wrong. My point is, he's obviously head over heels for you and deserves a chance to prove it. Allison took another bite of ice cream and then put the lid on. I'm off to bed. I have to tutor a few students, and they signed up for early slots. Bummer. Good night. Sam turned on the TV and grabbed her Afghan. Allison chuckled as she went to get ready for bed. It didn't matter how long Sam had worked for the day. She still had to get in her favorite shows before she could sleep. Allison yawned as soon as her last student left the practice room. She'd fought the exhaustion for the full hour, hoping to make it until the end of the lesson. Her dreams last night had gone between her parents fighting and being left by Nate over and over in different settings. When she was left stranded in the middle of an island with no way to get home, she'd given up trying to sleep and gotten up to shower. If she hurried, she could get home and sleep for a few hours before work that night. The snow that had threatened the night before had given way to the sun. Allison stood outside the building for a moment to enjoy the warmth on her face. It had been an awful winter, and she was ready for spring to come. She hurried past a group of students and took the subway back to her apartment. As she made her way out of the subway, she froze. Nate was only a few feet away, looking at his phone. If she could just get past him. She ducked her head and pulled her collar up higher, then took the steps 2 at a time. She heard her name called, but she continued down the sidewalk, her face burning. Every ounce of her wanted to turn around and walk back, but she forced herself to keep going. She'd been burned 3 times, and she wasn't about to let it happen again. Sam looked up in surprise when Allison threw open the door. What are you doing here? I need sleep. Allison dropped her bag and shoes inside her room and flopped on her bed. She had 4 hours until she had to go to work. 4 hours of sleep. If only her brain would allow her to drift off. The thought of calling in and canceling was tempting after waking up with a sore throat. But with Eddie going out, the last thing he needed was an angry crowd. She'd just have to leave early if her throat got worse. Allison reapplied her lipstick and straightened her hair one more time before she was satisfied. She could hear Sam humming to herself in the other room, which meant she was ready and wanted to leave, but didn't want to bug Allison. She grabbed her coat and a few cough drops before going out to the living room. Oh, there you are. I was just about to come and get you. Sam wore a form-fitting red dress that accented her curves. Sorry, you look amazing. I'm glad I made you get that dress. Allison grabbed her keys off the counter. So am I. You don't think it's too much? Sam followed behind. She'd meet Eddie at the bar before heading out. Allison laughed. No, and Eddie won't know what hit him. They arrived at the bar just a few minutes before Allison had to go on stage. She waved at Sam as she went back to drop off her stuff. Her throat had only gotten worse on the way to the bar, and she was pretty sure she was getting a cough. Maybe walking all over outside the day before hadn't been such a great idea. The crowd was large that night, but it was clear after only a few songs that Allison wouldn't be able to do much more. Her muscles ached, and her voice had a raspiness to it that wasn't normally there. She forced out one more song before bowing. There were a few protests as she left the stage, but she didn't care. She was freezing, and her eyes felt puffy. It was definitely time to go home. The call for an encore made Allison cringe, but she crept out the back way, hoping she wouldn't lose her job over this. Allison's phone buzzed as she stumbled down the sidewalk. She pulled it out of her pocket and almost dropped it. Hello? Hey, this is Darren. I got your message and I have some free time right now. Want to practice? I could grab a classroom. Allison groaned. I'd love to, but I'm really not feeling well. I must have caught something. Are you free tomorrow? No, I have meetings all day. This is really the only time I can until class next week. How sick are you? I'm ready to die. I think it's a cold, but I'm not sure. I just know I need to sleep. There was silence for a moment. Can we just run through it a couple of times? Then you can go home. Allison bit her lip. They really needed the practice, but she wasn't sure how well she danced when she was this sick. And she'd just skipped out early from work. Listen, I have my car. I'll come and pick you up so you won't have to take the train. I'm not too far away anyway. Fine, but if you get sick, don't say I didn't warn you. Meet me at the apartment so I can grab my shoes. Got it. Allison stared at her phone for a moment before continuing home. She collapsed on the couch and wrapped herself up in a blanket, hoping she could sleep just for a little bit before he got there. The knocking on the door was muffled, but it was enough to pull Allison off the couch. She stumbled over to the door, shivering. Darren stood in the doorway smiling and holding a bag. Hey, sorry I was late, but I wanted to stop by and grab this for you. Allison took the bag and pulled out a container of chicken noodle soup from the diner just down the road. Their diner. You remembered. Of course I did. He slid past her and went into the kitchen for a spoon. Now go lie down on the couch and I'll bring you some. There was no way she was going to argue with that. She grabbed a couple ibuprofen for the achiness and then curled back up in her blankets. Darren brought her a bowl of soup and then sat next to her with his own bowl. The heat from the chicken broth soothed her throat while the ginger burned. It was Darren who had introduced her to the soup when she'd first moved to New York. Is it helping? Darren set his bowl on the coffee table. Yes, thank you. It was exactly what I needed. Allison drank the last bit of broth and leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes. Darren stood, and Allison could hear the rattle of dishes in the kitchen. She knew she should get up to change into her shoes, but she didn't want to move. A moment later, she felt Darren sit next to her, and he brushed a strand of hair from her face. Oh, wow, you're burning up. Darren jumped up and came back with a damp washcloth that he set on her forehead. Where's Sam? On a date. Allison kept her eyes closed, willing her forming headache to go away. I don't think I'm going to be able to dance tonight. I'm sorry. Darren pulled her close to him so her head rested on his shoulder. Just rest. The sound of the TV murmured in her ears as she drifted in and out of sleep. Allison vaguely heard Sam come in, along with a few voices talking to each other, before the door slammed shut. Darren stood, and Allison rested her head on the pillow next to where he'd been sitting. The door opened and closed again before Sam came and sat next to Allison. What happened to you? She asked. I don't even know, but I'm not sure I'll survive it. Allison coughed and sat up. What was that all about? Well? Nate came to say hi and kind of flipped out when he saw Darren with his arm around you. I tried to explain that you two were just partners, but he didn't seem to care. Sam's eyes narrowed. That's all it was, right? Allison coughed again, trying to remember what had happened. The medicine had kicked in, so the aches were gone, but her head was still cloudy. He came over to pick me up so we would practice our dance, but he brought soup instead. Right. I'm sending you to bed. I can't believe you didn't tell me you were sick before. I'm not about to argue. Night. Allison stood and shuffled to her room where she dropped onto her bed. Nate had come by. What in the world for? She rolled over and closed her eyes. It was something she could deal with later. Chapter 9. Nate ground his teeth as he passed the spot where he'd first met Allison. The thought of her with that guy frustrated him. He thought they were just dance partners. He had no idea they had a history together. He couldn't bring himself to pull out his phone and play the game they'd played together. He could still hear her laugh and feel her hair tickling his cheek. As soon as the train stopped, he pushed his way out and up the stairs. Last night he hadn't slept, and it was beginning to wear on him. He grabbed a coffee from the break room and dropped into his chair. Sometime during the night, he'd had a flash of brilliance for one of his clients and needed to get that done before concentrating on the commercial for Mr. Byrne. Ideas were still running through his mind for the Irish twist, but he needed to get the others done first. He pulled up a fresh template for the ad and pulled the outfits to figure out a better way to put them on paper. Once that was done, he could call and discuss their commercials. He changed out the backgrounds a few times before deciding on a royal blue that would directly contrast the pastels of the clothing. It was against everything he'd been taught, but he wanted them to stand out. Then, if the client didn't like it, he could go back to the original and they'd be happy with it. He could win either way, or lose the account, but he was pretty sure this would work. He coordinated the outfits differently, finding ways to complement each other instead of the contrast he'd used before. Another rule he was breaking, but again, it looked better now. Once he was done, he picked up the phone. Hey, Deborah, could you come in here for a sec? I'll be right there. Her door opened a few minutes later, and she stood behind him, peering over his shoulder. I thought I'd approve the other ad for this line. Why'd you change it? Nate cringed. They wanted something different. I wasn't able to tell you before I had to take off yesterday. Deborah frowned. I'm not sure it's something that will get their attention. Give them a call back and tell them it's too late and that you already sent it in. But I've worked on this all morning. Nate ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. I'm sorry, but we can't just keep changing things to people's whims. Deborah walked back to her office, and Nate stared at her closed door. Normally he agreed. Normally he shut them down immediately by pointing out the contract. But Allison and Mr. Byrne had gotten under his skin. Sometimes it was good to change things up, and he really liked this one better than the other. He turned and held his breath as he sent off the ad. He was sure they'd like this one better, even if it cost him his job in the process. His hands shook as he answered other emails and assured customers that things were going well with their accounts. He'd never gone against what Deborah said, wanting to make the best impression he could so that he could get the better clients, but he knew he was right this time. It wasn't until after 3 meetings and lunch with his accountant that Nate finally heard back. He just sent an email to Deborah with his plans for an Easter candy commercial when she appeared at his door. He could tell by the set of her shoulders that she was upset. In the second meeting room, now! She turned without saying anything else, and Nate stood and followed her, heart thumping in his chest. Lynn Booth, the head of the clothing line, sat near the end of the table with a wide smile, while some of her assistants sat next to her chatting softly. Deborah sat at the end, her hands clasped together. Ah, there you are! Lynn stood and shook his hand. I was worried I'd interrupt something by just showing up here, but I had to come and thank you personally. Nate stood there stunned. Really? This is brilliant! I would never have thought to use the colors you did, and the way it pulls out each of the designs is exactly the change it needed. She turned to Deborah. If it is all right with you, I'd like him to become our official agent here at Silverscript. I've seen his other work, and I'm highly impressed. This was just the deciding factor. I mean, is that something I can request? Deborah glanced over at Nate before answering. Of course. We'll make sure that gets taken care of. You won't be sorry. Just send all your inquiries directly to him, and I'll get something written up in the meantime. Nate chewed on his lip, hoping the strained smile didn't mean a lecture after Lynn left. But he had a feeling that was exactly what it meant. It didn't matter, though. He'd just gotten one of the larger accounts set up directly under him. Deborah walked out with them and turned to mouth, "In my office," before continuing out the door. Nate swallowed and walked out of the room, still dazed from what just happened. He stood inside Deborah's office, tapping nervously on the desk. "Sit!" Deborah slammed the door behind him and strode over to her desk. She waited for him to sit and then leaned forward. "What do you think you're doing? I told you to stick with the other one that had already been approved." "I know, but they wanted something different, and since I was already changing the Broga shoes commercial, I figured I could try it with this one as well. I'm sorry, but I don't regret sending it on. I think it worked better with the line of clothes she wanted to advertise." Nate clenched his jaw, trying to keep his temper in check. Deborah narrowed her eyes. There was a big difference between the two. This one had already gone to print, which means it cost us money to change. The other one had time to change. There's no difference. Either way, we're going to have to redo the shoe commercial and pay more for taping, actors, and the crew. It's the same. Look, you know I'm right here, and I'm sorry for disagreeing with you, but I stand by what I did. Nate took a deep breath. Deborah jerked back as though she'd been slapped. "You!" She stopped and studied him for a moment. "Don't do this again, or I will fire you. I won't have you wasting the company's money on a whim. Follow the procedures or you're gone." Nate stood. "Understood." There were curious looks from other agents who stood near Deborah's door, but Nate ignored them as he went back to his desk. He buried his face in his hands, trying to calm down the anger and frustration that threatened to overflow. This job was his life, and losing it would have been devastating. He pulled out his phone and uploaded the photos he'd taken of the memorial and other Irish buildings throughout the city. There were a few ideas running through his head, but he needed to figure out the best way to make it work. Allison was in a few of the pictures, lost in thought as she gazed at the memorials. There was the option of running each of the commercials he'd thought of, but it would cost more money to do it that way, and he didn't think Deborah would approve the budget. Nate wrote out each of the options and ran through them a few times before he was satisfied. Once he had them right, he sent the ideas to Mr. Byrne to see which one he liked best. There was something missing, and he needed to figure it out. A message popped up on his email, and he clicked on it. "These are exactly what I had in mind. Well done. I like the second option the best, although I think we need a better way of showing off the actual shoes. Is there a way you can incorporate that more?" Nate rubbed his chin. The idea had been to show the different ways the Irish culture had affected life in the city, but Mr. Byrne was right. Maybe if someone walked through wearing the shoes from each era, that could work. He emailed back the suggestion and stood to stretch. It was long past his lunch, and a walk would allow him to clear his head. The sun shone down on him as he walked down the street toward the small deli nearby. It seemed that spring was finally showing its head. It was about time. He waited in line to order, and his eyes fell on the soup on the menu. From what Sam had tried to tell him the night before, the Darren guy had taken Allison some soup because she was sick. Would it be too tacky to take her some today? Nate checked the time. He had an hour to eat and get back to work. He went out on a limb and ordered the soup and sandwich combo for her, and another sandwich for him. The worst she could do would be to kick him out of the apartment, but he needed to know if there was anything between her and Darren, and it bugged him that he cared so much. A cab sat nearby at the curb, so Nate jumped in and gave the driver the directions to Allison's house. He buzzed up to her apartment and waited for an answer. "Yeah?" It was Sam's voice. "Hey, it's Nate. Can I bring up some food?" There was a slight pause before the door was unlocked. He tried the elevator, but after a few minutes he gave up and took the stairs. When he knocked, Sam answered immediately. "What took you so long?" She had her coat on and purse in her hand. Elevator's broken. Sam sighed. Of course. I'm late for work, so it makes sense that it would be broken. See you later tonight. Nate moved so she could go past and then walked into the apartment. Tissues were spread all over the floor, and Allison lay on the couch covered in several blankets. Her eyes widened when she saw Nate standing in the entryway. Nate, why are you here? She tried to sit up, but held her head and groaned. Maybe he shouldn't have come. After all, he'd stolen the soup idea from another guy. Well, I brought soup. But if you want to sleep, I can go. She waved him over. No, please stay. I could use the company. Only don't look too close because I look terrible. Nate chuckled. You look fine. Well, except your hair. That could use some help. Hey, I've been stuck on the couch since last night. She tried sitting up again. What kind of soup did you bring? Well, you had chicken noodle yesterday, so I figured I'd bring tomato. I hope you like it. He handed her the cup along with a plastic spoon. She pulled the lid off and breathed in. Oh, that smells so good. All it needs is a grilled cheese sandwich. You mean like this? Nate pulled out her sandwich. She grinned. Wow, you're totally prepared. It's my favorite meal when I'm sick and figured you could use it. Most people go for chicken noodle, but my mom always insisted this was better. He took a bite of his chicken sandwich and watched as she took a sip of her tomato soup. How is it? Best tomato soup I've ever had. Where'd you get this? She dipped her sandwich into the soup and bit into it. Small deli by my work. They're pretty cheap, but the food is excellent. They sat in silence as they ate, and Nate was glad he'd come over. A glance at the clock told him he'd need to take off soon, but it was hard to leave. He pulled up the document that he'd sent to Mr. Byrne and handed it to Allison. What do you think? Allison read through them. They're great. Did you decide on one? Kind of. He likes the second option, but wants the shoe more prominent, which makes sense since that's what it's about. I was thinking of showing the evolution of the shoe over the decades. I'm waiting to hear what he thinks. Nate took the phone back and glanced at it. I just hope it works. It's much better than the original idea, so I think he'll love it. Allison set her cup down and nestled into her blankets. Nate stood and took the garbage into the kitchen to throw away. When he came back into the living room, her eyes were closed. He leaned close to her ear. Thank you for the idea. She smiled but kept her eyes closed. Her cheeks had more color, and she looked better than she had when he got there. You're welcome. Get feeling better. I'll come by later. I mean, if that's okay with you. Of course. She rolled onto her side. I won't be going anywhere anytime soon. Nate leaned down and kissed her on the forehead. I'll be back then. Chapter 10. Allison stood in front of her closet, deciding what to wear. She was finally feeling better, and it was time to get back to work. After going to dinner with Nate. He'd come by every night for the last week, bringing her dinner and showing her progress with the commercial. He was still convinced something was missing, even though she'd assured him several times that it was perfect. The knock on the door made Allison's stomach jump. He was early. She grabbed her favorite red dress and pulled it on. It flowed, so it was fun to dance in, but it also fit perfectly to her form. She grabbed some earrings and put them in as she left the bathroom. She stopped short when she saw Darren standing in the living room. What are you doing here? She cleared her throat. Sorry, I wasn't expecting you. I came by to see if you could practice our dance tonight. My date fell through, so I'm free for a bit. His eyes swept over her. Did I catch you at a bad time? The worst. I'm just about to head out, actually. The disappointment was evident on his face. Okay, well, I'm glad you're doing better. Another knock came at the door, and Allison groaned. Not now. Not when Darren was standing right there. Nate opened the door. Hey, are you ready? What are you doing here? Darren glanced between Nate and Allison. I just came to see if we could practice our dance. What are you doing here? Taking her out. Nate's face was a mix of emotion. But if you two need to practice, we could always go there first. Allison looked at him with surprise. Really? You told me you needed to practice. The university isn't too far from where I have reservations. You could practice and then we can go from there. He paused. If that works for Darren. Darren nodded. We could do that. The audition is only a couple of weeks away and we're not anywhere near ready. Okay, let me grab my other shoes. The cab ride to the university was probably one of the most awkward 10 minutes of Allison's life, and she was relieved when they could climb out. Darren opened the door to the classroom and went over to the stereo to pick the right music. Allison turned to Nate. Thank you for letting us practice. Nate smiled. Of course. I know how worried you were about this. Yes, but you also just put off our date so I could dance with him. Allison beamed up at him. Most guys wouldn't have let her go off and dance with someone else when they were supposed to go out to dinner. This is important to you. Besides, I like watching you dance. He looked over her shoulder and went over to sit on a bench. Allison sat and quickly changed shoes before walking over to Darren. Let's go all the way through, and then we can decide what needs to be worked on from there. I was going to say the same thing. He pushed play, and they went through the movements. Allison concentrated on the angle of her arms, the way she held her body, and her leg movement. The dress she'd chosen to wear whipped out around her as he spun her around. He seemed to keep her closer to him, lingering with each move as if he didn't want to let her go. The spark that had been there before was back, and it made their dance that much smoother. And the longing in his eyes. She blinked, pushing the thought away, as she remembered the man sitting on the bench in the corner of the room. He was the one who had her heart. When the song ended, Darren dipped her, then pulled her toward him so they were face to face. Nate stood and clapped, breaking Darren's gaze as he looked over and glared. He let go of Allison and turned back to the stereo. Let's do that again. We lost the rhythm for a few beats near the middle, and we have to make sure it works. He glanced over. Make sure you're counting right, or we'll be off when the song is done. I was counting. It was you who stepped wrong right there. Her response was sharp, but his tone stung. He was never that harsh to her while they danced. He smirked, but didn't say anything else. They went through the dance 2 more times, and it was clear neither of them were into the dance. The moves were sharper, and Allison felt better about going into the competition, but Darren's comments had only gotten worse. When he demanded one more time, Nate stood. No, I think we're done here. Our reservations are in 20 minutes, and that barely gives us time to get there. Nate took Allison's hand. We'll see you at the competition. Allison looked up at him in surprise, but didn't say anything until they left the building. You're coming? I wouldn't miss it, especially if he's that rude to you again. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her in. It was the first time he'd held her that close, and she loved how at home she felt there. He's never been like this. Pretty sure you intimidated him. Allison laughed. So, where are we going to eat? Nate was silent for a moment. My apartment. Allison stopped walking. Your apartment? Yep. I figured we'd had enough soup to last a lifetime, and I wanted to cook for you. We could do it at your place instead if you want. But you said, were you lying to Darren? Allison tried really hard not to laugh, but it was hard when Nate blushed. Yes, dinner at a restaurant would be nice, but a quiet evening at his apartment sounded so much better. Nate cleared his throat. I may have said that to have an excuse to get you away from him. Sorry if you were expecting more. We can go out instead if you'd like. Allison took his hand. No, I think that sounds good. Where's your apartment? Nate flagged down a cab. Chelsea. Whoa. Allison had only been there once, but she knew how nice it was. She watched out the window as the buildings went by. How are you enjoying it? I'm unpacked, finally. Not hard when you only have a few things. The movers finally delivered everything from storage so that I'd have fun organizing things just how I like them. Much nicer than dealing with a roommate. Nate had told Allison all about Roger the night before, and she could totally understand what he meant. She'd been lucky to share with Sam. Of course, she wouldn't have moved here if Sam hadn't insisted. I'm sure it is. The cab pulled up to the curb and they climbed out after Nate paid the driver. Allison took in the chatter of the area around them as she waited for Nate to unlock the door. The hallway inside was much cleaner and well kept than the one she lived in. Wow, is this building new? Allison asked as they waited for the elevator. No, but they just renovated parts of it. I was lucky enough to get one of the newer apartments. The ride was smooth and opened to show another hallway identical to the one below. Nate's apartment was just a few doors down from the elevator, and while it was slightly smaller than Sam's, it was newly painted, and Nate had done a great job decorating. The furniture was sparse, but she liked the look. This is amazing! Allison set her coat and bag on a chair and straightened her dress. Thanks. I still can't believe I managed to snag it. Nate moved into the kitchen and pulled out vegetables and a few pans. Make yourself at home. This shouldn't take long. Allison leaned on the counter. I can help cut vegetables or something if you'd like. Nate pulled out a cutting board. Are you sure? I don't want to wear you out after all that dancing you just did. I'll be fine. Allison took the knife from him and chopped up onions, peppers, and garlic while he started cooking some chicken. She smiled at his humming as he cooked. What? Nate poured some oil into a pan and turned on the burner. Nothing. Allison finished chopping and set the board next to the stove. Nate slid his arms around Allison's waist, making her breath catch. He'd put his arms around her before, but this was the closest she'd been to him. Are you making fun of my humming? Not everyone can sing as beautifully as you. I'm not making fun of you. I thought it was cute. Besides, you have a very nice voice. You just don't realize it. Allison gazed up into his eyes as she wrapped her arms around his neck. He leaned down to kiss her just as she caught the smell of burning oil. She jumped away. I think it's ready for the onions. Nate blushed as he dumped them into the pan. Sorry, I got distracted. I didn't mind the distraction. I just didn't think you'd want your pan to get destroyed. Allison watched as he stirred the onions. Maybe not, but it would have been worth it. He winked at her and scooped in the garlic. Once it was cooked, he added the peppers and then the sauce. He turned. Now, where were we? Allison couldn't help grinning as she let him pull her to him. She laid her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I like this kind of cooking. Nate laughed. I must say that it's my favorite. The thought of moving from that spot was too much as she looked up into his eyes. Her stomach tied in knots as Nate leaned down, his face just inches from hers. Their lips met, sending a shiver of pleasure through her. She was hesitant at first, but relaxed and leaned into him, enjoying his arms around her and the hunger she felt for his kisses. The moment was suddenly shattered by the loud ringtone from Nate's phone. Allison broke away. Aren't you going to get that? Allison asked, pointing toward the phone on the counter. Nate pulled her closer to him. No, it can wait. Allison laughed as he came in for another kiss. It was amazing how alive she felt after one simple kiss, but she wanted more. When the phone stopped and immediately began ringing again, she pulled away. Are you sure? It seems urgent. He grabbed his phone and checked it, grimacing before setting it back down. No, it can wait. The elation dampened slightly as she caught the name Katie on the phone. Who was she? A sister? When Nate kissed her again, she forced herself to forget the paranoid thoughts and just enjoy being with him. A couple of minutes later, the pot of sauce began to simmer, so Nate had to pull away to stir it. Allison sat at the counter and watched him cook. He moved between the sauce and checking the rice in the rice cooker. The phone buzzed again with a text. It was Katie, telling him to pick up the phone. Is that your sister? Allison asked casually. No, it's just a girl I dated a while back. His discomfort was evident, but she didn't push it any further. Soon, the pasta was finished and Nate pulled out 2 plates. I hope you're hungry because I made enough to feed an army. Allison took the plates from him and set them on the small table. I'm starving. Great. He set the pot of noodles down and then grabbed the sauce. He added an extra flourish to each of the steps and then set the plate in front of Allison. "Dinner is served." Allison scooped some of the pasta and red sauce onto her fork and took a small bite. The flavors burst in her mouth with a zing of spiciness at the end. "This is fantastic. I've never had spaghetti with peppers before, but I think I'm hooked." "It's my grandma's special recipe. People would come and eat at her house all the time throughout the year. Maybe that's why I made so much. I'm used to watching her." Nate laughed. "That's so sweet that she did that." Allison tried to picture her grandma doing the same thing, but it was impossible. Not that she didn't love her grandma. She was one of the most wonderful people Allison knew. She was just more into going out dancing or other social events than cooking for people. Nate smiled. She was the best. She passed away 2 years ago this Wednesday. "I'm so sorry." "That's part of life, I guess, but I sure miss her." Nate stabbed at the pasta on his plate. He checked his watch. "Oh, we'd better get going. You need to be at work soon." Allison was shocked to see how much time had passed. She ate the rest of her food quickly and went into the bathroom to change. When she was sure her hair was just right and that there was no food in her teeth, she went out to find Nate. They walked out of the apartment and down to find another cab for the ride. The breeze bit her cheeks as they waited. "Ready to go on stage?" Nate asked once they'd finally found a taxi. "Yes, I need to perform again. I just hope my voice can hold out." She'd lost it for a day or two, and she worried that it would take longer to come back. They hurried into the bar to find that the crowd had gathered already. Allison squeezed Nate's hand before hurrying backstage to drop off her jacket. She grabbed the guitar that Eddie kept in the dressing room and made sure it was in tune. She smiled out at the crowd. "Man, it's good to be back. Who's ready to dance?" Everyone cheered as she started her first song. She closed her eyes to concentrate on the notes, trying not to cringe at the huskiness to her voice. Maybe she should have waited another day. Her replacement, Leia, waved from the side of the stage, and Allison nodded to acknowledge that she'd seen her. She ended the song and bowed before introducing Leia. The applause wasn't quite as loud, but Leia had only come a few times and hadn't gained as much of a following. Allison weaved her way through the tables and back to where Nate sat with Eddie. She took the glass of water that Eddie handed to her and drank the entire cupful before setting it down on the table. "You were amazing up there tonight." Nate leaned his elbows on the table and took Allison's hand in his, caressing her fingers. "How are you feeling?" "Exhausted." Allison tried to stifle a yawn, but it was no use. She needed to get to bed soon. Nate studied her face. "Let's get you home." "Okay." Allison stood to go, but stopped when Leia started her next song. It was a slower Adele song that was one of her favorites. Nate glanced between Allison and the stage. "I take it you like this song?" "Yes. Can we stay until the end?" "Of course." Nate led Allison toward the group of people dancing in the center of the bar. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, swaying gently to the music. Allison looked up and caught a wink from Nate as he turned her in a circle. When they came back together, he slipped both of his arms around her waist. The song ended, and Nate leaned down to kiss her softly. Nate took her hands and led her out of the bar with a wave to Eddie. "Do you work again tomorrow night?" "Yes, unless my voice goes." "It's a good thing Leia was there, or we would have had to end early again." "Well, you sang beautifully." "Thank you." Allison was grateful it was dark so he didn't see her blush. The air was cool as they walked back to her building. Nate stopped so Allison could unlock the door, and then they headed up to her apartment. He brushed his fingers against her cheek before leaning in to kiss her again. It was more insistent this time, making Allison go weak in the knees as she melted into his arms. When they finally pulled away, Allison fumbled for the doorknob. "Thank you for the wonderful evening. I enjoyed myself. Maybe I should let you cook for me more often." Nate kissed her on the nose. "Deal. Now go to sleep. I'll see you tomorrow after work." Good night. Allison went into her apartment and leaned against the door with a contented sigh. Voices came from Sam's room, but Allison didn't stop to say good night. All she wanted to do was drop into her bed and let her exhaustion take over. If she wasn't careful, the fever that seemed to be looming nearby would attack. Chapter 11. Nate hummed as he pulled out his umbrella and made sure to lock the door behind him on the way out of the apartment. The night before had been better than he'd hoped for, and he wanted to have Allison back to his apartment soon. Visions of the ballroom dance ran through his head as he walked down the street to work. Besides the fact that Darren had been so rude to Allison, the dancing had gone well. He was pretty sure he wouldn't be able to convince her to partner with someone else, considering that they teamed up a year or two before and worked so well together, even if there was an obvious jealousy on Darren's part. Nate's phone buzzed and there was another text from Katie asking to go out again. He should never have told her about the contract. All she wanted was to get her hands on a pair of Broga shoes, and buttering Nate up wasn't going to work. Not when all he could see was Allison's eyes and feel the touch of her lips when he went to sleep the night before. Deborah met Nate at his office when he walked up. "We just heard from Mr. Byrne. He loves your ideas. He'd like to see some examples." "Well done, Nate. And about yesterday, I have to say I was wrong. I went back through the ads again, and you were right to change them." "Thanks." The praise shocked him. Not that Deborah hadn't ever been happy with his work before, but this was different. "Why did Mr. Byrne contact you instead of me?" Nate had waited all night for an email from Mr. Byrne, and it really bugged him that he'd gone over his head. Deborah shifted her position. "He didn't. I needed to talk to him about the budget, and he raved about your ideas. If you could get me some options for models, I'll look through them. That way you can work on the other accounts." "I'm still working out a couple of the concepts. If you could just approve the information I sent last night, I'll be able to work on this one today." Deborah loved having the final say on models, but Nate really needed to do it this time. Maybe it would help him figure out what he was missing. "Sounds great. Oh, and I'll be sending out a few more accounts later this afternoon. No one has been decided for any of them, but I figured I'd let you choose the ones you want." Deborah pushed off the wall and went into her office, leaving Nate standing shocked behind her. He'd get to choose this time? Usually he was just assigned them. These accounts must have hit a chord with her. He sat down and checked again for a message from Mr. Byrne, but there was nothing. There were other things he could be doing, so Nate pulled up the database of models. He could get the actors later once Mr. Byrne had approved his work. Because they would be doing several different eras, he chose models from different age groups, but tried to stick to those with an Irish background. As he found models he liked better, he crossed others off the list. "Hey, Nate, you have a woman here for you." Erin stood at the doorway. "Did she give a name?" "She says she's your girlfriend." Nate looked over and frowned. What was she doing here? He was pretty sure she had class. "Allison?" Erin shook her head. "She said her name was Katie. Want me to send her away?" "No, I'll go deal with her." Nate saved his work and stood. "Is this for the shoe campaign?" Erin stood next to him looking at the laptop. Nate sat back down and scrolled through. Katie could wait. "I'll figure out the commercial after I figure out if this will work." Erin studied each of them. "Those are good. I've worked with a few of them and they do a great job." "I hope so." Nate stood. "So, where did you leave Katie?" "Downstairs." Erin frowned. She didn't seem too thrilled to be left there. Nate shook his head. "Sounds about right. Thanks, Erin." "No problem. Oh, and Jake wanted me to thank you for the commercial the other day." "He did do me a huge favor." Nate grabbed his phone and put it in his pocket. "In 5 minutes, call me up for a meeting." Erin laughed. "Got it." Nate took the elevator down to the reception area and found Katie standing there, pouting. "Hey, Katie, I was told you needed me." Her pout deepened. "I've tried calling you over and over, but you're not answering. I wanted to get some dinner with you." "I have plans. I need you to stop calling, please, and don't come to my work. I'm not allowed to have people visiting me here." She batted her eyelashes. "I just thought you'd want to see me." I'm dating someone else. Now please, just go. Nate started back toward the elevator, but Katie grabbed his arm. Who is she? The anger in her voice surprised Nate. Nate sighed. It doesn't matter. He walked away before she could say anything else. He just hoped she wouldn't go after Allison. He'd have to be more careful who he asked out. Not that it mattered anyway, because he didn't want to ask out anyone but Allison. Mr. Byrne finally called near the end of the workday and set up a meeting at the same pub they'd eaten at before. Nate considered inviting Allison to come with him, but decided against it. He'd just have to go over to her apartment later than he wanted. Nate packed up and left the office, hoping he'd have better news this time. Traffic was bad enough that he finally climbed out a few blocks early and walked the rest of the way. Mr. Burns sat in the same booth as he had before. He waved when he saw Nate and waited for him to sit. Thanks for meeting with me. Nate reached out and shook Mr. Burns' hand. Of course. I would have called earlier, but I was in meetings with my shareholders all day. Mr. Byrne pulled out a folder and set it on the table. These concepts are much better than the original ideas. I have to admit, I was a little concerned. Nate smiled even though the comment annoyed him. He'd worked hard on it, and even though it hadn't been exactly what Mr. Byrne wanted, it was still a good ad. I'm glad you like them. I've been working on your ads, and I'll have that over to you in the morning. Thank you. Mr. Byrne smiled up at the waitress and ordered the stew again. Nate ordered and turned back to the conversation. Once we have your approval, we'll get back to the commercial and should have it out a week before Easter. Perfect. Mr. Byrne leaned forward. I'm curious, though. How did you come up with the concept? I visited several places here in New York that helped me out. The history was fascinating, and I knew I wanted to pull them in. Nate's mind went back to the joy on Allison's face as she listened to the guides during the tours. It really is. Mr. Burns sat back so the food could be set out on the table. Ah, just what I needed. Thank you. Nate smiled at the waitress and picked up a spoon for the stew. He'd been craving it ever since he'd come last. He definitely needed to bring Allison sometime. He sipped the rich broth and listened as Mr. Byrne told stories of life as a young Irishman in New York City. Nate looked up in surprise as music started over the speakers. What's going on? It's March. They like to start St. Patrick's Day a little early here. Mr. Burns smiled and nodded toward the center of the room. People lined up for dancing, and Nate recognized some of the steps from when Allison took him dancing. Nate shook his head. How had he not figured this out? This is why you wanted me to change the commercials to go back to your roots. How can I be so stupid? Mr. Byrne laughed. Close, but no. That date is important, but I wanted to celebrate April 24th, 1916, when we proclaimed our independence from the United Kingdom. Clearly, I need to study your history more. I guess we'd better step up production if we're going to hit either of those dates. Nate watched the dancers as joy radiated from them. The steps beat into him, and an idea tickled his mind. I know what's missing. What do you mean? Mr. Byrne cocked his head to the side. Nate pulled out his wallet and dropped some money on the table. We'll start recording your commercial at the end of the week. I'll make sure editing gets done. I felt like something was missing, and I just figured it out. He hurried out of the restaurant, ignoring the questions from Mr. Byrne. He needed to catch Allison before she left the studio. She was the answer to the missing piece. It was one thing to have the shoes change in each scene, but he wanted something more, a dance that pulled each of them together. Because traffic had been so slow earlier, he ran straight for the subway, hoping he could get the right train in time. He cursed when he saw that he was on the wrong platform and had to race through another tunnel to get to it. The train pulled away seconds after he sagged into his seat. Allison still hadn't answered his text, and Nate hoped that meant she was still dancing. Nate raced from the subway to the building where Allison usually practiced. The door was locked. He turned to find another way in just as a group of students left the building and grabbed the door just as it was about to shut. He checked each room on the way to the one Allison and Darren practiced in the day before. Music blasted from the stereo, but it didn't cover the yelling between Allison and Darren. Nate yanked the door open to find them inches from each other, both with clenched fists. Allison jumped back when she saw Nate, and Darren walked over to turn off the stereo. "What's going on in here?" "He just tried to kiss me." Nate glared at Darren. "He did what?" Darren wouldn't meet Nate's eyes as he stared down at Allison. "She clearly wanted to be kissed by the way she was dancing. I just took her invitation." "It was a dance. We were supposed to be dancing like that." Allison's voice was like ice. "We've been partnered for years. You've never used moves like those before. You know you enjoyed it." Nate moved forward to grab Darren, but stopped in shock as Allison punched Darren in the face. Blood spurted from his nose as Allison bowed in pain, holding her hand. She'd be lucky if she hadn't broken something. Darren swore at her and yelled obscenities as he stumbled for the door. Nate followed closely with Darren's bag and dropped it outside of the classroom before going back to Allison. "That was amazing." Nate led her over to the bench and gently took her hand. A bruise had formed around a couple of her knuckles. "My brother taught me to fight. I just never thought I'd have to use it." Allison clenched and unclenched her fist, groaning as she did it. "I think I just ruined our chances for this audition." "No, I'm pretty sure Darren did." Nate laughed. "Maybe I should have your brother teach me. I've never seen such a powerful punch." Allison grinned. "Boys didn't mess with me back home." "I can believe that." "So what are you doing here? I thought we were meeting for ice cream later." Allison bent over to grab her water bottle. Nate turned so he could face her. "I figured out what was missing from the commercial, and I need your help." She raised an eyebrow. "I was helping you, remember?" "No, I mean, the idea was to have people in different shoes, right? Well, tonight I was at the pub with the owner, and when everyone started dancing, I realized that's what was missing. We need something to lead from one scene to the next, and I was hoping that we could have some kind of dance that could do that." Nate studied Allison's face, hoping she'd agree. "That's a fun idea. I like it. What kind of dance did you have in mind?" Allison stood in the center of the room. Nate stood and scrolled through the dances he'd found while on the subway. "Well, I was thinking of a modern twist to a couple of the traditional dances." He pushed play and handed the phone to Allison. She tapped her foot as she watched the video. "This could work. And since the audition probably won't happen now, I can get to work on choreographing it." Allison handed Nate his phone and went over to the stereo where a binder sat. "I'm pretty sure there are some Irish songs. Oh, here we go." She played through a few of the songs while dancing and counting to herself, lost to everything around her. Nate sat in the corner to stay out of the way. As she danced, he ran the commercial through his head, trying to imagine how it would look with the songs she'd gone through. "What do you think?" Allison stood with a hand on her hip. A lock of hair fell into her face, and she pushed it back. "I like the second one best. The third ballad was beautiful, and it tells the story of the uprising. But I think it might be a bit depressing for the commercial. We want people to buy the shoes, not curl up and cry for the past." Allison nodded. "I agree. Although, I kind of like that song more. Maybe we could find a way to mix it. You're doing different eras, right?" "Yes, but we only have about 30 seconds for the whole thing, unless we were to rent a Times Square space or something, but that's a good $1,000,000 right there. It'd take up most of his budget." Nate tapped the floor, running numbers through his head. "Maybe it'll work, though." Allison stretched, her arm arched over her head as she leaned to one side. "What are you thinking?" "I think if we make a longer ad, we can use that on Times Square and then use a smaller cut of it for the rest of the stations. It's going to take some major schmoozing to make that work. A good thing I know people, and by people, I mean my boss knows people." Nate was pretty sure he could talk David and Deborah into helping him get a spot. David could walk into pretty much any store in New York and ask for whatever he wanted, and Deborah knew other connections in the industry. "Okay, I need to get going, but I can work on the dance over the next couple of days. How long do we have?" Allison leaned down and touched the ground. Nate's legs hurt just watching her. "Until Friday. I can put it off if you need to change it." "That should be fine. I have the next couple of days off because Eddie has some karaoke contest thing going on." Allison changed her shoes and slid the bag over her shoulder. Oh, does that mean you don't work tonight? Nate took her hand as they walked out of the room, making sure the light was off as they went. Allison shook her head. I got the call just before I came here. It's a good thing, though. My cough still hasn't completely gone away, and my singing just makes it worse. Guilt tugged at Nate. He was pretty sure she'd gotten sick because of their day touring the city. I can take you home, then. Should we grab some food on the way? My guess is Sam already ordered Chinese food. It's our thing on Tuesday nights. You're welcome to join us. Allison flagged down a cab. I hope you don't mind. I just want to go home. A cab is great. He opened the door for her. We need to get you better. Allison laid her head on his shoulder. I'm getting there, just slower than I'd like. Nate caressed her fingers, careful to avoid the bruises. He still couldn't believe she'd punched that guy. Not that Darren hadn't deserved it. Nate had been seconds away from doing the same thing. Sam had the containers of Chinese all set out when Allison and Nate got up to the apartment. When she saw Nate, she turned and grabbed another plate without saying anything. Allison set her stuff on the floor next to the couch and dropped into a chair. Rough day? Sam glanced between them and shoved a spoon into the rice. It was pretty good, actually. I'm just exhausted. Oh, you got cashew chicken! Allison dumped some onto her plate. Nate chuckled and sat next to her. I take it you like it. Not usually, but this place makes it taste amazing. Allison handed him the carton and moved on to the chow mein. How was work? Boring as usual. How'd class go? Sam took a bite of her egg roll. A snicker escaped as Nate grabbed some noodles. I'd say it could have gone better. Allison grinned mischievously. You're probably right, even if he did deserve it. Oh, come on, spill. Sam threw a wadded-up napkin at Allison. Allison told Sam what had happened, and Nate joined in, adding details where Allison skipped over them. I've been wanting to do that myself. I wish I'd been there. Sam tossed a fortune cookie to Allison and kept one for herself. Sorry, Nate, I didn't know you were coming, or I would have gotten you one. That's okay, I'll survive. This time. Nate took a bite of his noodles. The flavor was just perfect with the sauce and vegetables. Okay, I have to know. Where do you get your Chinese? Place a block away from here. It's on my way home from work. Sam broke her cookie and made a face. Hate it when they just put a saying in there. Waste of a cookie. That's exactly why I didn't mind not getting one. Mine always seems to be quotes. Nate dished more of the noodles onto his plate. Once he was done, he stood and took his plate to the sink. I'd love to stay and hang out, but I have a commercial to plan. Allison stood and wrapped her arms around him. Thank you for coming by tonight. I don't know how things would have gone otherwise. Nate kissed her. It looked like you had things under control, but you're welcome. Chapter 12. Allison tapped her foot to the beat in her head as she watched the city buildings pass by. The commercial shoot was that day and nerves were getting to her. Nate had tried to find someone else to do the dance so she wouldn't have to, but there wasn't time for anyone else to learn it. He'd promised not to focus on her face at all, but it wasn't her face she was worried about. The dance was new, and while she could have done it in her sleep, she was still nervous. She straightened the green and gold dress Nate's coworker had picked out for her. It was much different from the ball gown she was used to dancing in, but this was traditional for Irish dance, and she wanted to make sure everything was perfect. The cab pulled up to the Hunger Memorial, and her nerves rose to a whole new level. She paid the driver and went to find Nate before she could change her mind. Video cameras were everywhere, and Allison searched for someone who knew what they were doing. Her heart lifted when she saw Nate talking to an older man. He looked up and smiled when she approached. Aaron found the perfect outfit. You look fantastic. Mr. Byrne, this is Allison. She'll be your dancer. Allison put her hand out for Mr. Byrne to shake. It's nice to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about your dancing. Thank you. Allison took a deep breath to calm down. Where do I go now? Nate gestured toward a table to the side. Makeup first. We're going to do some recording before you come in. Oh, okay. Makeup? Maybe she shouldn't have spent an hour doing it herself. She sat at the table and two women crowded around her, poking and prodding at the braid she twisted around her head, and then moved on to the makeup. Allison sat in a chair next to Nate and the director. They watched as the actors moved through the set, going through the sequence several times until the director decided it was perfect. Dancer? Where's the dancer? The director belted out. Oh, that's me. Allison stood and laid her jacket on her chair. She stood where Nate told her to and took a deep breath. Nate stood and lifted her chin so she would look into his eyes. Listen, I've seen you do this dance 1,000,000 times. I know you can do it. Now, go through the motions, and when he yells cut, go 2 more beats just to make sure we can transition to the next phase. Got it? Got it. Allison took a deep breath and waited for the director to yell action. It was a little unnerving to dance without the music, but she kept count in her head as she moved about the set just as she'd rehearsed over and over for the last few days. When she finished, there was a stunned silence before the crew and director clapped. That was beautiful! Now, do it again so we can do it from a different angle. The director leaned forward in his chair and called, action! Again, once Allison was set up. By the time they were ready to move on to the next location, Allison was exhausted. Seeing the pleased expression on Mr. Burns' face kept her pushing through the fatigue. Allison dropped onto her couch and groaned. Remind me to say no the next time I'm asked to do this, please. Sam grabbed the blanket and pillow and threw them at Allison. You know you love it. I still can't believe he's using you. There wasn't much choice. His other dancers were awful. Allison rearranged her blankets and pillow. Where is he, anyway? Sam sat next to Allison's feet and handed her a small carton of ice cream. Allison pulled off the lid and dug into the rocky road. Editing the clips. They have to make sure they have enough footage. Otherwise, we have to do it again tomorrow. Joy! Guess you don't want to go to a movie with Eddie and me, then. Sam rested her feet on the coffee table. No, thanks. If he's done in time, we're going to have dinner over here. Allison still needed to figure out what to make and grab the ingredients. Tomorrow. Tonight, she wasn't going to move. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She opened one eye but didn't budge. The only one who would text this late was Nate, but she just couldn't bring herself to pick it up. I suppose you want me to get that for you. Sam shifted and dropped the phone on Allison's lap. Thanks. Allison fumbled with her phone and checked the message. Perfect. We'll have to redo a different part, but yours is good. Sleep well. Looking forward to our date. Me too. See you then. Good night. Hallelujah. Allison rolled onto her side. I'm free. Sam laughed. I take it the shoot looks good? Yep. Now what's on TV? I'm ready for a good chick flick. Allison dropped her bags inside the door and stood on the opposite end of the room from Darren. Hopefully her professor would get the hint and pair her with someone else. Unfortunately, her mental pleading had done nothing because they were stuck together for the foxtrot. Maybe she should have told her professor that the purple and yellow bruising around Darren's nose was from her. Allison. Darren stood next to her. His voice had a nasal quality to it that hadn't been there before. Darren. Allison bit her lip to keep herself from laughing. Guilt flooded over her from finding the whole thing funny, but she pushed it away. He deserved it. The music started, and while they went through the motions, Allison's heart wasn't in it. She kept going back to the evening before when Nate had kissed her goodbye. The way the light made his eyes sparkle as he leaned in was intoxicating. She jerked back to the present when she missed a step and stumbled into another couple. Sorry, she muttered and went back to the dance. Darren spun Allison and she moved off to another partner. Craig's movements weren't quite as sure as Darren's, but at least his smile was sincere. By the time class ended, Allison's nerves were shot. Darren had taken every chance he got to insult her, quietly, but effectively. As soon as the bell rang, she grabbed her bag and jacket and ran out of the room. Hopefully, the students she would be tutoring would help her calm down a little, except that it was nearing finals and no one but Leia was ready for their piece. Every missed note or beat grated on her until she found herself snapping at Leia for no reason except that she was a minute late. Leia flinched. I'm sorry. My professor held me after class. Allison rubbed her forehead and took a deep breath to calm down. No, Leia, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled. It's not your fault. Are you ready? Yes. Leia set her stuff down and stood in the middle of the room. When she nodded, Allison started the music. Leia sang a ballad, and the melody rolled over Allison, taking her stress along with it. She closed her eyes, taking in the notes and the words. She flinched a couple of times when Leia went flat, but it was perfect otherwise. As the last note faded, Allison opened her eyes and smiled. That was amazing. Let's work on the chorus a couple more times, and I think you'll be ready. Leia grinned. You think so? Of course. Allison started the music and forwarded it to the right spot. Let's do it again. Leia went through the chorus, then listened to Allison's tips during the time it took to go back to the right spot on the CD again. By the end of the hour, Leia had it down. She picked up her bag to leave and turned back. Oh, I should be getting the results back from my audition this weekend. That's great. Text me as soon as you hear. Allison grabbed her bag and followed Leia out of the room. She had just enough time to get to the diner where she'd agreed to meet Nate. He'd suggested going out instead of cooking at the apartment, and she was more than happy to change plans. The sun beat down on her as she walked to the subway, so she pulled off her jacket and tied it around her waist. It was warm enough that she decided to walk to the diner, since it was halfway between his work and the university. The sidewalks were packed, but she still made better time than she would have if she tried to catch the subway. The bell rang as she opened the door to the diner, and she looked around to find Nate. She couldn't wait to talk to him about everything that happened that day. Her heart stopped when she spotted him in the back, kissing a short blonde girl. Not the one she'd seen him with at the bar, which made it worse. He pulled away from her and met Allison's eyes just as she pushed the door back open. Allison ignored him calling her name as she shoved her way through the crowds to run from the diner. How stupid could she have been? He dated that girl, and then there was the Katie on the phone. Was that her in the diner? Who cared? And now Allison was just one more on his long list of girls. She wiped a tear and went straight back to her apartment. She still had a few hours until she had to get to work, so a long nap sounded good about then. Sam was gone when Allison walked into the apartment. Perfect. She just wanted silence. She dropped on her bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to get her mind to focus on something else. But how could she forget something like that? She rolled over and bumped the desk. The picture frame with the photo of her mom tipped and fell. She picked it up and stared at the woman she'd fought so many times. They were too much alike. Her mom said that included their bad taste in men, but she was wrong. Dad was a good man. She just forgot that after a while. It had been months since she'd seen them. Maybe she should go home and check on them. But then she'd have to explain to them what she did for work, and that wasn't something she wanted to deal with. Besides, that would take money. Chapter 13. Nate pushed Katie away, furious with her. What was that for? I told you I'm not interested. Katie pouted, but Nate barely noticed. All he could see was Allison's dark ponytail bouncing away as she ran from the diner. But we had such a good time together. I just thought we could pick up from where we left off. Katie stuck out her bottom lip. What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost. My girlfriend, and you just upset her. Just stay away from me. Nate grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the diner, hoping to catch up. There was no sight of her on the sidewalk, so he continued on to her apartment, cursing himself for being so stupid. He shouldn't have even talked to Katie. Nate stopped long enough to grab some roses and ran the last block before ringing the bell. When she didn't answer, he cursed under his breath. Was she even there? He checked his watch. With only a couple of hours until work, it was likely. One of Allison's neighbors came out of the apartment building and smiled at Nate as he walked past. Nate grabbed the door and slipped in. The elevator seemed to be stuck on the 4th floor, so he took the steps 2 at a time. When Allison didn't answer with the first knock, he pounded louder, hoping she'd hear him. After a couple of minutes, it was clear she wasn't coming. Nate set the dozen roses next to her door, wishing he had a pen to write her a note. Instead of going to dinner like he'd planned to do with Allison, Nate decided to go back to work and bury himself in the new contracts he'd been given. 2 were simple, and he had put the layouts together in minutes. They were the same layouts he'd always done, because he couldn't put his heart into the work. Allison's face kept coming to mind. He sent the finished layouts to Deborah for her approval and checked his email one more time. The tech people had sent him the video for the commercial. He hesitated for a moment before clicking on the video. Scenes from the history of the Irish in the U.S. played in front of Nate, moving from one era to the next. Each time Allison danced through the scene, his stomach twisted in knots. He missed that smile and the way she moved. The commercial had turned out much better than he'd expected, so he sent it on to Mr. Byrne, hoping that he would agree. Nate forwarded the video to Allison as well, hoping she would get it. She deserved to see how it turned out. Maybe it would convince her to call him. He added a note about how much he enjoyed spending time with her. Deborah knocked at the door. "Hey, got the layouts. I sent you back some suggestions, but I like what you have so far." "Thanks." Nate closed his laptop. "I'll take a look tonight and get them back to you tomorrow." Deborah tipped her head to the side. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Nate shoved his laptop into his backpack. "Well, I'm headed out for the night. If you want to talk about it, I have about an hour before I have to meet Lance." Nate shook his head. "It's nothing. I'll see you tomorrow." Deborah narrowed her eyes, but didn't say anything as she walked back to her office. They'd worked together long enough that he probably could have told her what was going on, but he just wanted to leave. The weather had cooled off, but Nate decided to walk home. He needed to clear his head and figure out some way to get her back. This was a whole new area for him. Usually he just moved on to another girl. Someone bumped into Nate and jerked him out of his thoughts as they swore at him and told him to watch where he was going. Nate looked up, surprised to find himself in front of the bar where Allison worked. He glanced at his watch before going inside. Eddie stood at the bar filling a glass for a customer. He frowned when Nate sat in front of him. "What did you do to my singer?" "What do you mean?" Nate folded his arms on the countertop and leaned forward. Her eyes were red and swollen when she came in. Eddie handed him a drink and wiped his hands on a towel that draped over his shoulder. Nate rubbed his eyes. "She caught me kissing someone else." Eddie stared at him in shock. "I thought you liked her." I do. It wasn't my fault. It was a girl I took out for New Year's. She won't leave me alone." Nate took a drink before continuing. "We were talking at a diner when she suddenly wrapped her arms around me and kissed me. I pulled away, but not fast enough." "I'd love to say I'm sorry, but you kind of brought it on yourself." Eddie smirked. "I warned you that your dating habits would backfire at some point." Nate sighed. "I know. I just wish you weren't right." "She's an amazing person. I suggest you bend over backwards to apologize to her, but not tonight. I need to ask you to leave so you don't mess up her performance." "Are you serious?" Nate laughed in disbelief. "Look, you didn't see her when she came in, and if she catches sight of you, I'm not a performer. I'm sorry." Nate gulped down the last of his drink and pulled out his wallet. "Fair enough." Eddie took the cash. "Thank you. I'm doing this for her." Nate waved and left the bar, knowing that Eddie was right. He made his way to the Irish pub Allison had taken him to a few weeks back. He ordered some dinner and watched the dancers as they went through their routine. One of the waitresses flirted with him, and he flirted back, but only half-heartedly. It was hard to break old habits, but he wasn't into it. She dropped her card with her number on it with his bill, but he left it on the table. Nate stopped by an art supply store on his way home and grabbed some supplies. He knew he wouldn't be sleeping that night and figured he might as well do something with his time. Nate took a drink of his orange juice and studied the painting he'd worked on the night before. The strokes were broad and colorful to match the modern feel he wanted for the apartment. He'd been up until 3 in the morning trying to get it just right, but he was happy with how it turned out. It had been too long since he'd taken the time to paint, and it felt good to get back into it. His parents had tried to get him to use his eye for art in other ways, which is why he'd gone into advertising. He made a note to grab a frame on his way home from work and rinsed out his glass before putting it into the dishwasher. Mr. Byrne had set up a meeting that morning, and Nate was worried that it meant he didn't like the commercial. The subway probably would have gotten Nate to work faster, but he wanted to avoid the platform where he'd first met Allison. He'd tried texting her a couple of times the night before, but she hadn't answered. Deborah and Mr. Byrne were already in the conference room when Nate arrived. He set his stuff in his office and hurried to the room. The smiles on their faces eased Nate's nerves as he sat across from Deborah. "There you are. Mr. Byrne was just telling me how much he loved the commercial." Deborah smiled at Nate. Nate let out the breath he'd been holding. "I'm glad to hear that. It captured exactly what I'd been hoping to see, and your dancer did a beautiful job. What was her name again?" "It's Allison. She's amazing." Nate swallowed hard. "With your approval, we can have it released by April 24th. Mr. Byrne beamed. "That would be wonderful." Nate turned to Deborah. "Do you have the paperwork for him to sign, or do I need to get it?" "It's all signed and ready to go. He just wanted to thank you personally." Deborah slid the papers to Nate for him to look over. "Oh, and I almost forgot." Mr. Byrne bent over and grabbed 2 boxes. "I brought some sandals for you and some dance shoes for your friend. Please give them to her for me. I noticed how worn her others were." "Thank you." Nate took them from Mr. Byrne and opened one of the boxes. "These are my size." Mr. Byrne winked. "I know shoes. It was easy enough to find the right size. Now the style is a whole different story." Nate laughed. "They're perfect, thank you. And Allison will love the shoes. I hope to do more business with the both of you." Mr. Byrne stood and shook Nate's hand before leaving the room. Nate stared down at the boxes and jumped when Deborah cleared her throat. "Oh, sorry, I thought you'd left." "No, I hadn't. I wanted to tell you how impressed I am with your work. Keep it up." Deborah picked up the papers and paused as she moved to leave. "I hope you can figure things out with Allison." "What are you talking about?" Nate asked in surprise. Deborah laughed. "Anyone could tell how closed off you became once she was mentioned. I don't know what happened, but I hope you can figure it out. She's good for you." "Thanks." Nate waited for her to leave before pulling out one of the sandals. He tried it on, amazed at how comfortable they were. He stood and took both boxes to his office. He'd drop Allison's shoes off, even if she didn't want to see him. The rest of the morning was spent on the phone, arguing with model agencies and studios, trying to make one of his car ads work. They'd sent the wrong models for the ad, and the studios hadn't allowed them in, which meant they hadn't met the deadline. Nate glanced down at the shoeboxes sitting on the desk next to him. He had time right then to run over to her apartment, except that it was Thursday, which meant she had classes all day. Maybe that was better. Maybe he should just drop them off and leave again. Sam would be there. Of course, there was really no point to go by if he didn't have the chance to talk with her. He cursed Katie for the 100th time that day. If only he'd just avoided her in the diner. But then, she was the one who had found him. "Hey, Nate, Jake wanted to know what you thought of the commercial he was in." Erin stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "They were great. He was perfect for the part." Nate had been right to cast Jake, even if he was the one who took Erin away. Erin's face lit up. "He'll be happy to hear that. He's auditioning for a part on Broadway, and he's nervous about it." "He'll do just fine." Nate stood. "I'm headed to lunch. Want me to grab you something?" "No, I have a lunch meeting, but thank you." Erin glanced behind her. "Deborah might want something, though. She's been on the phone all morning." "I can do that. Good luck in your meeting." Nate left the office and headed for the diner across the street. His hand was on the door when he realized that Katie was inside. He backed up and went for the deli a few stores down instead. She was the last person he wanted to run into right then, and he had a feeling that's exactly why she was there. Her job was several blocks away, so there was only one reason she was around. He grabbed some soup for himself and a salad for Deborah, then checked to make sure that Katie wasn't outside before leaving the diner to go back to work. It was sad, really. He He was a grown man and had broken up with plenty of women, so he shouldn't be this bothered by her. But she'd gone too far and made him lose someone he cared a lot about. Deborah's door was still closed when Nate got back to the office. He set his food down on his desk and knocked softly on her door before opening it slowly. He waved and set the salad down before going back to his own office. She could thank him later. Chapter 14. Allison stared at the shoes that had been sitting on her bed when she got back from school. Supposedly, Nate had brought them by. But why? The card had a thank you from Mr. Byrne, but this was the second time he'd been to her house in the last couple of days. He had been kissing another girl. That wasn't okay, no matter how many shoes he brought her. Sam insisted that Allison should give him a chance to explain himself. But what was to explain? Thoughts of Darren trying to kiss her ran through her mind, but she pushed them away. That was beside the point. Both she and Nate knew that Darren was a jerk. Allison shoved the shoes into her closet, knowing she'd get them out again later. They were beautiful and something she definitely needed. She pulled her hair back into a ponytail and wandered out to the kitchen for breakfast. She put her bread into the toaster and sat at the table to sort through the mail. Most of it was bills, but one caught her eye. It was from the dance competition she was supposed to be participating in. With all of the commercial stuff that had been going on, she'd forgotten to cancel her audition. She scanned through all the instructions before dropping the papers onto the table. Maybe she could just do a solo instead. She needed the money, and it wasn't worth dropping just because Darren was a jerk. Her mind instantly jumped into planning her dance. The one she'd used for the commercial was fun and original, but after the filming, she decided it needed more of a flair. The knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts, and she went to answer it. Nate stood there with a dozen roses. The pleading in his eyes nearly melted her. Nearly. But her mind went back to that kiss in the diner, and she swung the door shut. Nate stopped the door with his hand. "Please, Allison, let me explain." "What's to explain? You were kissing her. That's pretty obvious." Anger bubbled, mixing with the feeling of betrayal. "I just thought... Never mind." "No, that's not what happened. I mean, it is, but it wasn't me. Katie went out with me for New Year's and won't leave me alone. I'd already told her to stop calling and that I wasn't interested, but she found me waiting for you at the diner and kissed me before I knew what was happening." Allison raised an eyebrow. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" "Well, it's what happened, so yes." Nate looked down at the flowers and held them out to her. "I'm sorry." "Do you know why I don't believe you, even though I'd really like to?" Allison leaned against the doorway. Nate's eyes clouded. "No, why is that?" "Because you just keep disappointing me. You left me in the diner, I've seen you with at least 2 different girls since I met you, and then this kiss." Allison ticked the points off on her fingers. She knew she was being unfair. He'd already apologized for leaving her. Nate pushed past her, set the roses on the counter, and started searching her cupboards. When he found one of Sam's vases, he filled it with water. "What are you doing?" "The roses will die if they're not in water." Nate found some scissors in a drawer and cut the bottoms of the stems at an angle. "I know that, but what are you doing here? I didn't say I was going to accept them." Allison leaned against the counter and watched as he arranged them in the vase. Nate didn't say anything as he rinsed off the scissors. Allison took them from him and dried them before putting them back in the drawer. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He leaned down and kissed her forehead before going back to the door. "I'm sorry. I just hope you believe me someday." As the door closed, Allison flopped onto the couch. Why did he have to do that? She was all ready to push him away and never see him again, and he had to go do something like bring her flowers. The roses were gorgeous, and by the look of it, he'd arranged flowers before, probably for old girlfriends. She put a pillow over her face and screamed in frustration. "What happened to you?" Sam shut the door and moved toward the kitchen. A few seconds later, the pillow was yanked off Allison's face. "Who were the flowers from?" "Nate." "Ah, and did you thank him for them?" Sam threw the pillow onto the couch. Allison nodded and rolled over. "And did you forgive him?" Sam sat on the couch next to her. "No." Sam sighed. He's trying. Eddie told me Nate's been moping ever since the incident. Yeah, well, maybe he shouldn't have let her kiss him. Allison felt for the pillow and shoved it on her face again. Sam stood and left the room without saying anything. Allison followed her into her room and dropped on the bed. You think I'm being childish? No, I know you are. Sam glared at her. This isn't high school anymore. I'm not saying you have to date the guy. I just think you need to forgive him and move on with life. If it includes him, fine. If not, you'll find someone else. Allison glanced at the clock and jumped up. It was later than she thought, and if she was going to have time to practice at the school, she needed to go in the next few minutes. She threw on her tights, dress, and shoes, then shoved her dance shoes and a towel into her bag. Hey, I'm sorry. Sam stood in the doorway. No, you're not. You were right. I gotta go. Allison ran down the stairs and out onto the streets. It was chilly, but the run would warm her up. She darted in and out of the crowds, apologizing whenever she ran into someone. The bell rang out as she ran onto campus. Students poured out into the sidewalk, and Allison ran faster. She had 1 hour to practice before her class, and if she could get to the studio before anyone else, she'd have a chance to practice. The small room was empty, so she closed the door and locked it. People would be able to see that it was occupied, but she didn't want anyone coming in while she practiced. She ran through her playlist before finding a song to warm up to and hooked it up to the stereo. After making sure she had a pen and paper to write her moves on, she ran through the steps she choreographed. The movements eased her mind as she allowed the music to consume her. She spun and leapt through the air, concentrating on keeping her toes pointed and legs straight. When the song ended, she leaned over, trying to catch her breath. She wiped the sweat from her face and smiled. It was exactly what she needed to burn away her stress. She picked another song that was close to the one she'd used before, but with a faster beat. By the time the hour was up, she was exhausted, but thrilled with the dance she'd come up with. She shoved her towel and music into her bag and left the room. Darren smirked when she walked into the classroom, but she just smiled back and went to the other side of the room. He wasn't going to ruin her good mood. This time the professor got the hint and partnered her with someone else. After working on the waltz and the Charleston, they changed partners and worked on a few other dances. Allison was relieved that she didn't have any tutoring for the day because she was ready to collapse. She walked to the subway and dropped onto a seat on the train. She closed her eyes, enjoying some downtime. The voice announcing the stops blended in with her dreams as she scooted down further into her seat and leaned her head against the window. Allison? Nate's voice jerked Allison out of her sleep. She looked around wildly. Where was she? She glanced up at the sign and her eyes widened. She was clear on the other side of the city. Are you okay? Nate sat next to her. I'm fine. I just fell asleep. Allison rubbed her eyes and stood. Guess I better get on the other train. He jumped up. Let me come with you. Don't you think your girlfriend would be upset? Allison waited for the next exit and pushed the button. She already is, and I've tried to apologize 1,000,000 times, but she won't listen. Nate's eyes searched her face. That girl means nothing to me. She kissed me. I just wish you would believe me. Allison searched the subway map to find the right train and headed for the next ramp. She had to work that night, and she didn't have much time to eat and get ready. When she noticed that Nate still followed her, she turned. Look, I know that's what you say, but it doesn't stop the hurt. She kept walking and stood on the platform, waiting for her train to show up. I know, and I just wish I could take that away. Nate climbed on the train behind her and sat down. Allison sighed and watched out the window. She couldn't exactly tell him he had to get off. After all, his apartment was this direction as well. It was several stops before Nate spoke again. Are you still doing the competition? She looked at him in surprise. I punched Darren in the nose, remember? Yes, but never mind. His face reddened and he looked the other way. But what? Allison shifted in her seat so she faced him. Nate gestured toward the dance shoes that she'd tied to her bag. You don't normally wear those shoes for your classes, so I thought maybe you'd decided to compete. Allison blinked. How do you know I don't wear these for classes? He laughed. Because I've picked you up from class, remember? Usually you wear your worn-out shoes. Oh, right. Allison couldn't help feeling touched that he would notice such a small detail. It wasn't something they'd ever talked about. Her mind drifted back to the shoes in her closet that he'd given her. Such a small but meaningful gift, and she hadn't even noticed it. I decided to do a solo instead. I rearranged the dance I used for the ad. I hope you don't mind. Of course I don't. It was beautiful. Nate tried to take her hand, but she pulled it away. And I'm glad you're competing. The voice announced Allison's stop, and she stood to climb off the train. She paused and looked down at him. It was good to see you, and thanks again for the shoes. He smiled. You're welcome, and good luck with the dance. Not that you need it. Thank you. Allison climbed off and weaved through the crowd toward her apartment. Spending time with Nate sent her mind and heart through a rush of emotions. It was good to see him, but it only made the hurt cut deeper. She couldn't get the vision of him kissing the girl out of her head. Sam sat at the table and looked up when Allison dropped her stuff by the door. Where have you been? On the train. She grabbed a fork and plate and dished out some Chinese food. I fell asleep and missed the stop. Again? Sam laughed. You have got to stop doing that. Allison glared at her, but then joined in. Hey, it was only twice. Okay, maybe 3 times. Anyway, what are you doing home? I thought you had another shift. Cindy filled in for me. I have a date with Eddie tonight, and she told me she'd switch if I dished out all the details tomorrow. Sounds like Cindy. Allison popped a dumpling into her mouth. With Eddie not being there that night, she would have to get there early. The other bartender wasn't as pleasant to work with, and she'd been chewed out once or twice for being a minute late. Sam nodded toward the door. So, you for sure decided to compete? Yes, but how'd you know that? The shoes. Sam stacked the empty boxes together and dumped them in the garbage before taking her plate to the sink. You're the second person who said that to me today. Am I that obvious? Sam cocked her head to the side. Yes, but who else said something? No one else knows you as well as I do. Oh, don't tell me you're dancing with Darren again. No, definitely not. I'm going solo. And it was Nate. Apparently, I only wear these shoes when I'm serious about dancing or something. You saw Nate? Please tell me you forgave him. Allison shook her head. I don't know. He apologized again, but every time I see him, I see that girl in the diner. He already explained what happened. You need to give him another chance. Sam patted her hand. Now, tell me about this dance of yours. I'm really excited about this one. Allison went into the living room and pushed the coffee table back. I don't have a lot of space, but I'll show you what I can, and you need to tell me if I should fix anything. Sam sat on the couch. I can't begin to tell you how thrilled I am that you're doing this. Allison grinned and found the music on her iPod. She ran through what she could in the small space, but had to stop a few times to remember what was next. It was easier to go through it on the dance floor where she had nothing to stop her. Keep going. Sam pulled out her phone. I'll videotape it, and then you can watch it and see where you need to fix it. Brilliant! You're a lifesaver! Allison grinned and started the music over. This time she was able to concentrate on the moves instead of what was supposed to happen next. It helped her relax. When the song ended, Sam clapped. That was amazing! But I think you need to switch this move from a lift to a cut. She held out her phone for Allison. See? That way you can transition into the next step easier. Allison played back the video, and she was thrilled with how it turned out, but she could see where it was a little awkward. You could do it like this. Sam did the move while Allison watched. They'd taken dance together for years, but Sam had given it up for other things once they graduated. Oh, that's much better. Allison followed her steps and ran through the next few movements after that. Yes, that feels more natural. Sam bowed. You're welcome. You can pay me later. Someone pounded on the floor and the girls burst out laughing. Their downstairs neighbors weren't exactly thrilled with Allison's dancing. Okay, I'd better get ready, and you probably should as well. Don't you sing tonight? Allison checked the clock. Man, it's later than I thought. She quickly changed and grabbed her guitar before running to the bar. She got there just in time, but it didn't save her from a glare from the bartender. She just smiled and walked to the back to prepare for the evening. Adrenaline from dancing still poured through her body, and she was ready to share their energy with the audience. Chapter 15. Nate considered going to the bar to watch Allison sing, but decided against it. He'd already apologized yet again, and she obviously wasn't interested. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked through Times Square, trying to figure out where to eat instead. A small diner called out to him, so he went in and waited to be seated. A beautiful blonde waitress walked up and smiled. Just one tonight? Yes, please. And can I get a window seat? She grabbed a menu. Of course. He sat at the small table and opened the menu. I'll just have water for now. I'll get that and be back to take your order. Nate tapped the table as he picked what to eat. Being here alone wasn't something he liked, but he couldn't bring himself to bring a date either. The waitress set the water in front of him. Did you decide on anything yet? I'll have the steak and potatoes. Oh, and can I get a side salad as well? Caesar dressing, no croutons. Anything to drink? Nate stared at the options. How about a malt? I'll try the strawberry. I'll get that right out to you. She left, swaying her hips as she walked. Nate shook his head and pulled out his phone. There were a few emails, so he answered them the best he could without being at the office, and then switched to the game he loved to play on the train. Allison's top score still sat in front of him, and he couldn't bring himself to try to beat the score. Someone knocked on the window outside the diner. Nate looked up and saw Eddie and Sam standing outside, waving. Right, Eddie had mentioned he had a date that night. He waved back and watched as they went around the corner and came inside. What are you doing here? I thought you had reservations somewhere. Nate pursed his lips. He'd almost given away Eddie's plans. Sam slid into the chair across from Nate while Eddie grabbed another chair from another table. Sam said, We did, and dinner was wonderful, but we were talking about you and Allison when we came up with an awesome idea. Eddie said you eat in this area when you get depressed, so I figured we'd search for you here. I have to say, I thought it would be a lot harder to find you. Eddie put his hand on Sam's. Sorry, she's pretty excited about it. Why do I have the feeling I don't want to hear what you have to say? Nate leaned back in his seat and smiled at the waitress as she set his food in front of him. Would you two like anything? The waitress asked. Sam waved absent-mindedly. No, we're good. Nate watched the waitress leave before turning back to them. Okay, spill. Well, Allison is doing a solo for the dance competition, and we were talking about how it was a bummer that she couldn't do the couple division as well. She's going to kill it with the dance she came up with today, but I think she could win the other one as well. Nate's stomach burned with anger. You think she should dance with Darren? No! Sam's eyes widened. No, we want you to dance with her. They both stared at Nate, Eddie with amusement and Sam with anticipation. Nate laughed. You both realize I can't dance, right? That's the worst idea ever. He caught himself. I mean, that would work great if I actually knew how to dance, but the competition is what, next week? There's no way I can learn something in that amount of time. Sam grinned. Yes, there is. I have the dance routine in my notebook, and I've taken dance for most of my life. We just have to make sure we practice when she's busy so she doesn't suspect anything. Nate raised an eyebrow and glanced at Eddie. And you think this is a good idea? I think you need to do whatever you can to make it up to her. Eddie held up a hand. I know it wasn't your fault Katie kissed you, But is being right worth losing out on the girl you're obviously crazy for? This is seriously the first time I've ever seen a waitress flirt with you when you didn't care. That's saying a lot. I'm not that bad. Nate knew he was right. He'd do pretty much anything to get Allison back, including dance. Fine, I'm in. But if I butcher her chance for this grant, I'm holding it over your heads. Sam squealed and jumped up to hug Nate over the table. You won't regret this, I promise. Eddie stood and took Sam's hand. We'd better get going. I need to get back to the bar soon, and we wanted to take a walk through Central Park first. Thanks for stopping by, and I have the day off tomorrow for a dentist appointment, so it would be a good day to practice if you want. Perfect. I'm free after 1 o'clock. Sam let Eddie pull her out of the diner. Nate shook his head and chuckled as he took a bite of potatoes. They were a little cold, but he didn't care. He might have a chance to get Allison back, and that was the best news he'd had for days. Sorry this place isn't very big, but it's the only place I knew of where we could practice. Nate looked around the small gym at his apartment complex. It was meant for half-court basketball, but it wasn't close to the right size. It'll work. Sam pulled out her notebook. Okay, how much do you know about dancing? Nothing. Well, I watched Allison and Darren dance several times, but that's about it. Sam stared at him. You never took her dancing, ever? We danced at an Irish pub once, but that's about it. She rolled her eyes. You know she loves dancing, and you've never gone? Man, no wonder she doesn't think you care. Hey, we did plenty together. I even cooked for her. Now can we please start? Nate made sure his shoes were tied and stretched his legs. Okay, close your eyes and picture the dance that Allison and Darren performed together. Usually you would lead, but I'm going to until you get it down. Sam held out her right hand and set her left hand on his shoulder. Ready? No, but let's do this. Nate was perfectly happy with Sam taking the lead. The music started and Sam pulled him toward her. She was good. Not quite as sharp as Allison, but she definitely knew what she was doing. As they moved, Sam would say what step was next. Ouch! Sam called out for what had to be the 100th time. Nate let go. Are you sure this is a good idea? Yes, you're doing well. Sam walked over and grabbed her water bottle. It's more confidence than anything. You're trying too hard. I have to be good enough to compete in an event that will possibly grant her enough money to start a studio. Of course I'm trying hard. Nate wiped his face with a towel. Maybe I should do something else. Sam took him by the shoulders. Do you like her? Yes. Enough that you would do anything for her? Because otherwise I'm leaving right now. Nate nodded. Yes, I would. Okay, let's do this. Trust me. Sam turned the music back on and they ran through it a few more times before Nate finally felt like he was getting it down. She's going to be home soon, so I'd better get back. She shoved her things into her bag. How does Sunday look for you? Nate pulled out his phone. It's fine, but are you sure we can't meet before then? I really can't, but you can practice without me. Use a dummy or a pillow or something and just run through the steps. Go dancing if you need practice. See you Sunday. Sam ran out of the room and Nate stared after her. He had to be insane to think this was going to be worth it. He grabbed his bag and headed upstairs. There was no way he'd practice on his own when anyone could walk into the gym at any moment. Chapter 16. Allison stood in front of the mirror and studied the dress she tried on. It needed to be something that could wow the judges without taking away from her dance. Her friend Nancy had done a fantastic job. This was perfect. She walked out of her bedroom. What do you think? I'm pretty sure you'll knock out the competition just by your dress alone. Sam grinned. I'm glad Nancy is our friend. Me too. Now, I'm ready for a smoothie. 1 second, I'll be out. Allison changed and hung up her dress in the closet. It was the day before the competition and her stomach tied in knots every time she thought about it. Allison jumped when there was a pounding on her door. She opened it to find a very excited Sam. What? It's on! Sam ran back to the living room and Allison followed close behind. The shoe commercial was on, and there she was, dancing across the screen. A few of her students had mentioned they'd seen it, but this was the first time she'd seen it herself. She cringed when they did a close-up of her face, but otherwise, it had turned out much better than she'd expected. She hoped that Nate and Mr. Byrne loved it as well. "Do you still have that dress?" Sam asked. "It's in my closet. They gave it to me as a thanks for doing the commercial." "Why?" Allison slipped her shoes on and pulled her hair up into a ponytail. Sam shrugged. "I think you should take it tomorrow night, as a backup in case there's a wardrobe malfunction or something." "It doesn't really match my dance, but I guess it's probably a good idea. Come on." Allison grabbed her purse and they headed for the pub. It was packed because of the Irish holiday, but they managed to find a spot in the back. In hindsight, we probably should have just taken ice cream back to the apartment. Allison cringed as a fight broke out. Sam shrugged. "Yeah, well, we don't have a smoothie machine, and that's what we were in the mood for. Besides, it was too quiet up there." Allison laughed. They'd been stuck studying for finals all weekend, and both girls were about to go crazy. The dancing portion was easy enough for Allison, but the comprehensive test was full of dates, names, and places that had begun to run together. "It'll be a miracle if I survive this final. I should never have done biology while trying to pull overtime." Sam groaned. "I think you're brilliant for all those honors classes in high school." "Told you so." Allison grinned. "At least your classes have complemented your job pretty well, right? This way you can just use your final paper for the latest magazine article." "Yes, biology has everything to do with the latest trends in fashion." Sam yelped as a man slid into the booth beside her. "Excuse me?" "Sorry, but we needed a seat and you seem to have plenty of space." He held out his hand for her to shake. "I'm Sean. This is Austin." Another man slid in next to Allison. He winked and pulled out his phone. "What are you two doing after this?" "Studying." Allison scooted closer to the wall. "In fact, we were just leaving. Please let us out." "Oh, come on. We're new here and need someone to help show us around. You two are the only sane ones in the pub." Austin smiled at Allison, and she couldn't help being drawn in by the dimple in his cheek. Sam glared at him. "What if we told you we already have boyfriends and they'd be ticked if they knew you were bugging us?" "Is that true?" Austin asked. "If it is, we'll leave you alone." Allison stared at him, trying to figure out what to say. Truthfully, she wouldn't mind getting to know Austin a little better. He was cute, and he genuinely seemed to just want to talk. But he was no Nate. It was Nate who sent her mind spinning and heart racing whenever she was near him. And right then, she really wished he would walk in the door to help her out. "Earth to Allison!" Sam snapped her fingers in front of Allison's face. "Oh, sorry. Yes, we're already taken, sorry. Now please let us out of here." Allison stared at him until Austin moved and helped her out of the booth. "Thanks. You two take care." Brian smirked as Allison turned and left the pub. It wasn't until they were out on the street that Sam grabbed Allison by the shoulders. "What happened in there? You totally spaced out." Allison wouldn't meet Sam's eyes. "I miss Nate." Sam grabbed her in a hug. "I knew it. You should call him." "No, I already messed things up. Besides, it's almost midnight. I'll talk to him tomorrow. Or next week." "Tomorrow sounds good. Come on, you need to get some sleep." She looped her arm through Allison's and they walked up to their apartment. Allison went through the motions as she got ready for bed and nearly used an allergy cream instead of toothpaste. She wondered if it was already too late to get Nate to come back. She'd rejected him again on the subway and hadn't seen him since. As she lay in bed, she stared at his number in her phone. It would be so easy to call him right then. Most likely, he would be up working. She set her phone on the table and rolled over. Not tonight. Allison shook her hands and took deep breaths. Her turn to dance was coming up, and the butterflies in her stomach seemed to be on a rampage. This wasn't her first competition, and she knew it wouldn't be her last, but that knowledge still didn't help her nerves. The other soloists were fantastic. What was she thinking? While everyone else had most likely been planning and practicing for months, she'd only come up with the routine a few weeks before. Next, an aide called out. He pushed Allison toward the stage. Good luck. Thanks. Allison swallowed hard. She could do this. When the prelude to the song started, she walked out onto the stage and counted the beats in her head, then smiled and released herself to the music. While her feet danced, her mind envisioned the scenery at each of the sets they'd shot the commercial. She could still feel the pride as it had all come together. She leapt into the air and grinned as she heard the crowd cheer. As she twirled across the stage and broke into the Irish movements, there were more whistles and cheers. She pushed herself into the final pose and tried to catch her breath, waiting for the signal to leave the stage. She had to force herself not to run when she saw Sam waiting for her. Once they were out of sight of the judges, she squealed, I did it! Sam threw her arms around Allison. That was perfect! Flawless! Well, I slipped up on a couple of the counts, but I hope they didn't notice. Allison took a drink of water and sat down to take off her shoes. She wanted to catch the partner routines. Several of her classmates were going to be performing. Wait, why don't you put this on instead? Sam held out the dress from the commercial, along with the new shoes that Nate had given Allison. Allison pulled off her other shoe and flexed her toes. No thanks, I want my flip-flops and shorts. What if I had a suit to match? Nate's voice sent a shock through Allison. She jerked her head up. Nate stood there in a gold suit. His green tie matched her dress almost perfectly, and he wore a brand new pair of dance shoes. What are you doing here? Well, I'm part of the reason you don't have a dance partner for the competition. So I figured I'd step in. I mean, if that's okay with you. He held out a hand, his eyes pleading with her. It's the same dance you already learned. Sam taught me. Allison stared at him, not knowing what she was supposed to be doing. Part of her wanted to run the other way, but the rest of her wanted to run into his arms. Sam yanked her off the bench and shoved the dress and shoes into her arms. Go! You know you want to do this. We already signed you up. I think you're near the end of the lineup. Allison went into the dressing room and fumbled with the zipper on her dress. She finally slipped it up and over her head and pulled on the other dress. The dance shoes fit like they were made for her. She'd have to thank Mr. Byrne the next time she saw him. She pulled out the bun in her hair and put it into a twist. When she opened the door, Sam grabbed her and led her over to Nate. He paced back and forth, but paused when he saw her. Are you sure you're good with this? Allison asked. No, but I want to do it for you. Nate took one of her hands. Please forgive me. Allison reached up and kissed him on the cheek. You're forgiven. Now let's go out and win. The couple in front of them took their places on the dance floor. Their music was a little too fast for their movements, but they were sharp and definitely knew what they were doing. Allison was pretty sure she'd seen them around campus before, but didn't know either of the dancers' names. When they were done and Allison was given the signal, she took Nate's arm and they walked onto the stage together. Nate bit his lip, and Allison grinned at him, trying to make him smile. Nate's movements weren't quite as sharp as Darren's had been, but she could tell he'd worked hard to know the steps. He kept his hand on her back while he led her around the stage, and it felt good to finally be back in his arms. She didn't have to pretend that he had feelings for her as she stared into his eyes. When they stopped in their final position, cheers broke out through the crowd. They hurried off the stage so the next couple could perform. Allison wrapped her arms around his neck. You have no idea how much this means to me. He brushed a few stray hairs out of her face. I have to admit this wasn't my idea, but I hope that Sam and Eddie were right in suggesting it. They were totally right, although I might have to go after Sam for interfering. She reached up and kissed him hesitantly at first, and then with more intensity. All the doubt and frustration washed away as they stood there in the middle of the chaos backstage. When they finally broke away, Nate kissed her forehead and pulled her close. I was really hoping you would say that. I didn't know what I would do if you pushed me away again. Let's hope you never find out. Allison kissed him, finally feeling whole again. Epilogue. 1 year later. Allison stepped back and admired the sign. The small studio wasn't much to look at yet, but it was hers. Classes would start Monday, and there were already waiting lists. The money from the dance competition was just enough for a small place near her apartment. The rest of the money for equipment had come from Nate as a graduation present. Nate poked his head around the corner. "Hey, Allison, could you come and tell us if this looks okay?" "I'm sure it's fine." She followed him into one of the classrooms where he and Eddie had been hanging a bar for the ballet classes. "It looks good. Make sure it's sturdy. We don't want it falling off the wall on the first day." Nate kissed her on the cheek. "We double and triple checked." "Is everything else ready?" Nate pulled out the clipboard. "Unless other items have secretly added themselves to the list, we're ready to go. Relax." Sam walked up with a half-eaten cupcake. "I had to taste test to make sure it was all okay. I highly approve." "I'm pretty sure you already tested them last night at the apartment." Allison laughed. She took one last glance around the studio before turning off the light. Nate wrapped his arm around her. "Let's go home. I have a delicious pasta planned for tonight." "Sounds good to me." As they walked up to his apartment, Allison enjoyed the smells of the blossoming trees along the sidewalk. This is the perfect night. It's warm, the stars are out, and tomorrow I open my very own studio. I could think of something that would make it a little more perfect. Nate smiled over at her. "Oh, and what's that?" Nate got down on one knee and pulled out a box. Inside sat a large diamond ring. "Having you for my wife." This has been Change in Harmony, a Silver Script novel, Book 4, written by Jacqueline Hardy, narrated by Velis Valor. Copyright 2016, on by Jacqueline Hardy. Production copyright by Dragons and Fairy Tales Press. For my parents. Acknowledgements. When I first sent out Ring of Truth to my beta readers, I got the same feedback from several different people. They absolutely loved Nate and wanted to hear his story. This is all for you. I wanted to thank Carlene Hardy, aka my mom, Rebecca Blevins, Amy Petrovich, Constant Cohen, Denise Cervantes, Lisa Rackett, Mary Lawson, and Stephanie Littlefield for being such amazing beta readers. I really appreciate your help. Thanks to my family for being patient while I write, and for being such a huge support. I love you all. Thanks to Rochelle for another amazing cover, and thank you all to all of my fans for enjoying my books. It means the world to me. If you enjoyed this book, please leave a review at Amazon.com or Goodreads.com.